Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the cloistered lives of medieval nuns, where behind the convent walls, secrets flourished, scandals brewed, and forbidden loves blossomed in ways that rival any romance novel. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. If you think medieval nuns spent their days in silent prayer, twiddling rosary beads, and living a life of serene devotion, think again. The reality is far more interesting, and a lot less pious, than a medieval Pinterest board would have you believe. Let's dive into the world of medieval nuns and see what was really going on behind those cloistered walls. First off, let's talk about why someone might choose the nun life. Spoiler alert, it wasn't always about a burning desire for divine service. For many medieval women, joining a convent was like enrolling in the medieval version of a witness protection program. Faced with limited options, marriage or, well, marriage, some women saw the convent as a refuge from the chaos of medieval matrimony, with husbands who might treat you as well as they treated their livestock. Hint, not great. The convent offered an alternative. As a nun, you could at least live without fearing you'd end up in a Monty Python skit about oppressive husbands. Joining a convent wasn't just a personal decision, it was an economic transaction. Families often paid hefty dowries to secure a spot for their daughters, basically buying them a ticket to nunhood. These dowries weren't small potatoes either. We're talking sums that could fund a small army or buy a sizable chunk of land. Some families considered it a sound investment, better than letting your daughter marry that guy who smells like the pigsty he works in. And on the flip side, convents used these funds to maintain their operations, build libraries, and even engage in a bit of medieval real estate flipping. Once inside, the daily life of a nun was regimented, to say the least. Think of it as a military boot camp, but with more incense and fewer push-ups. Days were divided by the ringing of bells, marking the hours for prayer, work, and the occasional meal. Matins, lauds, prime. If it sounds like the daily planner of a medieval time management guru, that's because it was. The schedule was designed to keep the nuns busy and spiritually focused, though one wonders if it also kept them too tired to stir up any drama. But speaking of drama, let's not pretend these nunneries were all about peace and harmony. They were political powerhouses in their own right. Some convents were so wealthy and influential that they made the Vatican look like a charming bed and breakfast. The nuns wielded economic power, much to the chagrin of local lords and bishops. They managed estates, ran schools, and even negotiated treaties. Yes, treaties. Forget the stereotype of nuns as meek and mild. These women were like the medieval version of Fortune 500 CEOs, minus the corporate jargon. And let's not overlook the fact that nunneries were often hotspots of intellectual activity. Many convents housed vast libraries, offering a rare refuge for women who wanted to study and write. Nuns like Hildegard of Bingen weren't just praying, they were penning works on theology, medicine, and music. Hildegard herself was a polymath who could put your average Renaissance man to shame, centuries before the Renaissance even kicked off. Of course, all this doesn't mean every nun was living her best life. For some, entering a convent was akin to being shipped off to a remote island with a lifetime supply of porridge and prayer. But for others, it was an escape from the societal pressures of marriage and childbearing, offering a different kind of freedom that was rare in medieval times. So, next time someone mentions medieval nuns, picture less Sound of Music and more House of Cards. These women were far from the docile figures history sometimes paints them as. They were savvy, strategic, and sometimes scandalous, living proof that even in the Middle Ages, women knew how to play the game of thrones, sans dragons, but with plenty of divine intrigue. All right, so we've established that medieval nuns were less about serene devotion and more about strategic maneuvering and intellectual prowess. But let's get to the really juicy bits, the kind of stories that would make a monk blush and a tabloid headline writer swoon. You see, behind those cloistered walls, not everything was as pious as one might expect. In fact, some convents were hotbeds of scandal that could put any modern-day soap opera to shame. Take, for example, the story of Sister Agnes, a nun from a well-to-do family who decided that the confines of the convent weren't quite to her taste. In the 13th century, Sister Agnes was caught up in a scandalous affair with none other than a local priest. And before you say, a priest, how original, consider that this kind of liaison was akin to a medieval celebrity scandal. The affair was so notorious that it reached the ears of the Pope himself, resulting in a decree that Agnes be confined to her convent for the rest of her life. Talk about being grounded, medieval style. Now, Agnes wasn't an outlier. Many nuns found themselves in similar predicaments, caught between the vows they had taken and the allure of illicit romance. And who could blame them? The convent might have offered some freedoms, but it also came with a side order of isolation, and let's be honest, some pretty dull company. It's no wonder some nuns looked beyond the abbey walls for a taste of adventure, even if it meant breaking a few vows along the way. But let's not just focus on forbidden love affairs. Some nuns were crafting escape plans that would make even the best prison break movies look like amateur hour. Picture this. A group of nuns in 12th century Germany, led by the rebellious Hiltrud, actually managed to escape their convent by digging a tunnel. Yes, you heard that right. A tunnel. These women weren't just praying for freedom. They were literally carving their way out. Unfortunately, like many great capers, their plan was foiled, and they were captured before they could make a clean getaway. But still, that kind of daring makes for a legendary story, doesn't it? While some nuns were busy plotting escapes or clandestine meetings, others were becoming cultural icons in their own right. Take Hildegard of Bingen, whom we mentioned earlier. This remarkable woman was more than just a nun. She was a composer, a writer, and a visionary. Her works on medicine and science were groundbreaking, and her music still resonates today. Hildegard was so influential that she was eventually canonized as a saint, proving that nuns could indeed leave a lasting impact on the world beyond their cloister walls. And let's not forget the economic clout these women wielded. Convents were often the medieval equivalent of Wall Street, with nuns managing vast tracts of land and substantial dowries. One convent in England even ran a successful brewery, because why not diversify your spiritual portfolio? These nun-run enterprises often put them in direct competition with local lords, creating a tension that was as electric as a medieval joust. It was all about power, money, and influence, the holy trinity of medieval politics. But for all the audacious escapades and power plays, there were still those who genuinely found solace in the convent. For some women, the cloister offered a sanctuary from the turbulence of medieval life, a place where they could focus on spiritual growth away from the chaos of feudal society. These nuns were the unsung heroines, quietly dedicating their lives to prayer and service while the world outside raged on. So, as we peel back the layers of what it meant to be a medieval nun, it becomes clear that these women were anything but one-dimensional. They were complex, driven, and sometimes scandalous figures who navigated a world that often sought to limit them. As we continue to explore this fascinating chapter in history, remember that these nuns were far more than the meek and mild caricatures of popular imagination. They were, in many ways, the rock stars of the medieval world, living proof that even in the Middle Ages, women knew how to make waves, even if they had to do it from behind convent walls. So, as we peel back the layers of what it meant to be a medieval nun, it becomes clear that these women were anything but one-dimensional. They were complex, driven, and sometimes scandalous figures who navigated a world that often sought to limit them. As we continue to explore this fascinating chapter in history, let's dive deeper into the myths that have clung to these women like ivy on an ancient abbey wall, myths that deserve a good debunking. First up, the idea that nuns lived in saintly isolation, untouched by the outside world. If you imagine convents as spiritual fortresses, well, think again. These were more like bustling community centers. Sure, there were times of solitude and prayer, but these women weren't exactly hermits. Convents were hubs of activity where nuns interacted with merchants, pilgrims, and even wandering troubadours. You heard me right, troubadours, those medieval musicians with a penchant for love songs. And while you might think their serenades were reserved for courtly ladies, nuns were very much on the audience list. Some convents even hosted performances. Picture a medieval open mic night, only with more lyres and fewer microphones. Now, let's talk personalities, because the convent wasn't just home to the piously inclined. Oh no, it was a veritable tapestry of characters. You've got your sister Mary, the overly pious, who probably thought fasting was a competitive sport. Then there's Sister Joan, who had a rebellious streak wider than the Thames. And somewhere in between, Sister Matilda, the pragmatist, balancing devotion with a keen sense of survival. Primary sources reveal letters and diaries where nuns expressed everything from spiritual ecstasy to downright boredom and frustration. It's like reading the medieval version of a group text, complete with prayers, gossip, and the occasional existential crisis. One nun, Marjorie Kemp, couldn't be more illustrative of this spectrum. Known for her dramatic expressions of faith, think wailing and weeping during Mass, Marjorie was a medieval influencer of sorts. Her autobiography, considered one of the first in English, gives us an unfiltered glimpse into the mind of a woman who saw visions and wasn't afraid to share them. In today's terms, Marjorie was like a spiritual vlogger, minus the ring light. But what about the politics of convent life? These weren't just spiritual sanctuaries. They were political players in their own right. Some abbesses wielded power that rivaled local lords. They collected taxes, negotiated with bishops, and sometimes even challenged the king's authority. In 1290, Abbess Euphemia of Wherwell, for example, stood her ground against a rogue knight who dared to encroach on convent lands. Euphemia didn't just pray for divine intervention. She took the matter to royal courts, proving that these women could be as formidable in legal robes as they were in habits. Of course, we can't ignore the romanticized image of the nun as a recluse, completely devoted to the divine. While some did indeed pursue a life of spiritual seclusion, others were more like medieval multitaskers, praying, managing estates, and let's be honest, dealing with the occasional convent scandal. One of the more eyebrow-raising tales involves the Abbey of Fontevraud, where the abbess was reportedly so influential she could sway papal decisions. This wasn't just about spiritual leadership. It was about power dynamics that could make Game of Thrones look like child's play. And speaking of power plays, let's not forget the economic muscle these women flexed. Convents were often well-funded through those hefty dowries we mentioned earlier, and they knew how to invest. Some even ran lucrative businesses, from weaving workshops to, yes, breweries. Imagine a nun tapping a keg. Now that's a scene you won't find in most medieval manuscripts. These ventures not only supported the convents, but also provided employment and economic stability for surrounding communities. For a nun, managing a brewery wasn't just about producing ale. It was about producing influence. But behind the economic strategies and political maneuverings, there was always the very real human element. Nuns were women who had chosen, or been chosen, for a life that was far from simple. They dealt with the same emotions, desires, and challenges as anyone else. Some found fulfillment in spiritual pursuits, while others longed for the world beyond the cloister. This duality is what makes their stories so compelling. They were, in many ways, the original rebels, navigating a world that so often tried to confine them. As we continue to unravel the tales of these extraordinary women, remember that they were not just passive participants in history. They were active agents, shaping their destinies, and in some cases, the political landscapes of their time. So next time you picture a medieval nun, don't just see the habit and the halo. See the strategist, the scholar, the entrepreneur, and yes, even the rebel. Because behind every veil was a woman with a story worth telling, one that continues to resonate through the annals of history. As we peel back the layers of medieval nun life, it becomes clear these women were far from passive wallflowers. They were more like the unsung architects of their time, building societies from the ground up, one educated mind and healed body at a time. Imagine a world where education was as rare as a unicorn sighting and healthcare was, shall we say, a bit more rustic than today's standards. Enter the nuns, stage left, with their ink-stained fingers and herbal remedies, ready to change the game. Let's dive into their roles in education first. If you thought medieval schools were all about monks and male scholars, think again. Convents were the Ivy Leagues of their day for women, and nuns were the professors, deans, and sometimes the janitors. They taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to young girls who were lucky enough to dodge the marriage bullet. And in a time when women's education was as popular as a leper at a feast, this was revolutionary. Some convents even taught Latin, the language of the educated elite, effectively handing these women the keys to the intellectual kingdom. Take St. Hilda of Whitby, for example. In the 7th century, she founded a monastery that became a beacon of learning and culture. Her school produced 5 bishops, which might have made her the medieval equivalent of a top university president today. Hilda was a powerhouse, schooling future church leaders and fostering an environment that encouraged knowledge like a medieval TED talk. Her abbey was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the mead, and she was at the helm, steering the ship of intellectual progress. But wait, there's more. These nuns weren't just about book smarts. They were also the healthcare heroes of their time. When the plague wasn't knocking out half the population, the other half was dealing with all sorts of medieval maladies. Enter the nuns, with their herbal concoctions and basic medical knowledge, acting as the ERs and pharmacies of the day. The convent infirmaries served as the go-to healthcare centers, where nuns practiced what might loosely be called medicine, but was often the best option available. A standout in this arena was Hildegard of Bingen, the OG of holistic health. Her medical texts, filled with remedies and cures, were like the WebMD of the 12th century. She wrote about everything from migraines to indigestion, treating ailments with a mix of prayer and plants. Because why not hedge your bets? Hildegard's work was so influential that it transcended the cloister walls, making her a sought-after health guru for nobles and commoners alike. Now, we can't talk about nuns without addressing their political acumen. These women were not just passive pawns in the medieval power games. They were players in their own right. Some convents became clandestine hubs of resistance and reform, where the whispers of rebellion echoed through stone corridors. These convents were like medieval safe houses for political dissidents, where secret meetings were held and coded messages were sent. Abbesses often acted as political liaisons, skillfully navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics. They brokered peace treaties, settled disputes, and sometimes played a role in royal succession. It was like a chess game, and these women were the grandmasters, calculating every move with precision. Their influence was a double-edged sword, wielded with the sharpness of a quill pen dipped in ink and ambition. Consider the abbess of Quedlinburg, who held an imperial immediacy, a fancy term meaning she answered only to the Holy Roman Emperor. This made her one of the most powerful women in the empire, wielding more influence than some local lords. Her convent was a powerhouse, a fortress of female authority in a world dominated by men. She was the puppet master, pulling strings and making moves that would leave even Machiavelli impressed. But not all political maneuvers were above board. Some convents were embroiled in scandals that would make a modern-day political thriller look like a children's bedtime story. These nuns knew that in a world where power was often hoarded by a select few, sometimes you had to bend the rules, or outright break them, to get things done. Whether it was smuggling letters, or offering sanctuary to those in danger, these women knew how to work the system. In the grand tapestry of history, medieval nuns were the threads that held society together, weaving education, healthcare, and politics into the fabric of everyday life. They were the unsung heroes, the women who dared to defy societal norms and carve out a space for themselves in a male-dominated world. Their stories remind us that even in the darkest of ages, there were beacons of light, women who refused to be silenced, who challenged the status quo, and who left an indelible mark on history. As we continue our exploration, remember that these nuns were not just cloistered away. They were out there making waves, pushing boundaries, and reshaping the world in ways that still resonate today. The next time someone mentions medieval nuns, don't just think of quiet devotion and prayer. Think of the educators, the healers, the politicians, and yes, even the rebels who dared to dream of a different world. Their legacy is a testament to the power of women who refused to be defined by their circumstances and instead took destiny into their own hands. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this fascinating chapter of history, where the nuns were anything but ordinary. And so, we find ourselves at the end of this medieval tapestry, where the threads of history weave a story that's as much about the future as it is about the past. Medieval nuns, those enigmatic figures behind cloistered walls, left a legacy that reverberates through time, challenging our modern perceptions of strength, independence, and the role of women in society. Their lives were a curious blend of devotion and defiance, a dance between obedience and rebellion, and they've earned their place in the annals of history not just as religious figures, but as pioneers of change. Let's start with the economics, because yes, even the holiest of endeavors had a price tag. The dowries that families paid to convents were the medieval equivalent of college tuition, except instead of a degree, you got a habit and a lifetime of prayer. This wasn't just a spiritual choice, it was a financial strategy. Convents became economically self-sufficient powerhouses, managing assets and lands that rivaled those of secular lords. They spun wool, brewed ale, and some even ran guest houses that would put a modern heirloom to shame. In a world where cash flow was king, these nuns were the queens, adeptly managing resources to ensure their communities thrived. Consider the Abbey of Fontevraud in France, a sprawling complex that housed not only nuns, but also monks under the same roof, a bold move back in the day. The abbey managed vast estates, and its abbess wielded authority akin to a feudal lord. In the 12th century, this abbey's economic clout was such that it could afford to lend money to local nobility, flipping the script on traditional power dynamics. It's like a scene from a medieval stock market, with nuns as keen investors and power brokers. Their savvy financial dealings made them indispensable in a society where wealth equaled influence. Moving beyond the ledger books, let's talk about the intellectual legacy of these cloistered women. Convents were the unsung nurseries of knowledge, nurturing minds that would otherwise have withered in obscurity. They preserved and copied manuscripts, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients survived the Dark Ages. Some, like Hildegard of Bingen, not only preserved knowledge, but created it, penning works on everything from theology to natural science. Her writings on the healing properties of plants were centuries ahead of their time, a medieval precursor to the holistic health movements we see today. Hildegard wasn't just a nun. She was a one-woman Renaissance before the Renaissance was even a twinkle in Italy's eye. But the influence of medieval nuns went beyond economics and education. They were the early champions of women's autonomy, carving out spaces where women could lead and make decisions independent of male oversight. The abbess was often the highest authority within a convent, respected and deferred to by men and women alike. This was a radical departure from the patriarchal norms of the time, offering a glimpse of what a more egalitarian society might look like. These women didn't just pray for change, they embodied it, challenging the status quo and laying the groundwork for future generations of women leaders. And let's not gloss over the spiritual impact of these women. While some nuns might have been more interested in estate management than spiritual contemplation, many found profound meaning and purpose in their religious lives. They were the spiritual anchors of their communities, offering guidance and solace in a world where life was often brutal and short. Their prayers and rituals provided a sense of stability and continuity, a reminder that amidst the chaos of medieval life, there was a deeper, divine order. Now, let's debunk some myths while acknowledging their allure. The romantic image of the nun as a serene and saintly figure, untouched by worldly concerns, is as persistent as it is misleading. Yes, some nuns were deeply devout, dedicating their lives to prayer and meditation. But many were also shrewd administrators, canny negotiators, and occasionally scandal makers. They weren't just passive vessels of divine will. They were active agents shaping their destinies, and by extension, the world around them. The notion of nuns as cloistered recluses is equally misleading. While they lived behind convent walls, they were far from isolated. Convents were vibrant hubs of activity, where pilgrims, tradespeople, and the occasional troubadour passed through. Nuns engaged with the outside world in ways that were both practical and profound, from managing trade relationships to offering sanctuary to those in need. They were the original networkers, building connections that spanned social and economic divides. So, what does all this mean for us today? The legacy of medieval nuns is a testament to the enduring power of women to effect change, even in the most constrained of circumstances. Their stories remind us that strength comes in many forms, intellectual, economic, spiritual, and that true power often lies in the ability to adapt and innovate. In a world that often sought to silence them, these women found their voices and used them to shape their communities and, ultimately, history itself. As we reflect on their lives, we find inspiration in their resilience and ingenuity. They were women who dared to dream of a different world, who challenged the limitations imposed upon them and found ways to thrive. Their hidden histories continue to resonate, offering a potent narrative of strong, independent women who made their mark not by conforming, but by transforming the world around them. In wrapping up our medieval journey, it's clear that nuns were anything but ordinary. They were the architects of their own destinies, wielding influence in ways that were both subtle and profound. Their legacy is a rich tapestry of faith and defiance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is light. And as we look to the future, let us carry forward the spirit of these remarkable women, who proved that even behind the veil, one can find strength, wisdom, and the power to change the world. Francisco Pizarro. Not exactly the name you'd expect to spark the downfall of a mighty empire, right? Yet there he was, a man whose humble origins could have easily led him to a life of obscurity, perhaps as a pig herder, if the rumors are to be believed. Born around 1478 in Trujillo, Spain, Pizarro's early life wasn't exactly a rags-to-riches fairy tale, unless you count the rags. Was the illegitimate son of an infantry colonel, and a woman who wasn't exactly rolling in wealth. So, while other kids might have been dreaming of castles and chivalry, young Francisco was likely wondering where his next meal was coming from. Spain, in the late 15th century, was a hotbed of ambition and itchy feet. With the ink barely dry on Columbus's 1492 voyage, the Spaniards were in a frenzy, their eyes set on the fabled riches of the New World. And who could blame them? The promise of gold, glory, and guard was enough to make anyone with a taste for adventure. And let's be honest, a bit of greed packed their bags. But here's the kicker. Exploration wasn't exactly a low-cost hobby. It was more like a high-stakes gamble with astronomical costs. We're talking about ships that could run up to 1,000 ducats each, not to mention the cost of supplies, crew, and the occasional bribe to make sure your expedition wasn't completely illegal. Pizarro, with no inheritance to speak of, saw the New World as a golden ticket, a way to climb out of the muck of poverty. In 1509, he set sail for the Americas, joining an expedition led by Alonso de Ojeda to what's now Colombia. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. The expedition was a disaster, a comedy of errors, if you will, complete with lost ships, hostile locals, and a lack of food that made surviving on shoe leather seem like a perfectly reasonable diet. But hey, nobody said the path to fame was paved with gold, at least not yet. Despite the setbacks, Pizarro was undeterred. His resilience, or maybe just his stubbornness, saw him continue to forge his path in the New World. It was the age of exploration, after all, when every man and his dog seemed to be claiming a piece of the pie. The Spanish crown was throwing titles and territories around like confetti at a wedding, hoping to expand its influence and wealth. Pizarro, sensing an opportunity, teamed up with Diego de Almagro and Hernando de Luque for what would become one of the most infamous partnerships in history. But before we get to the juicy bits, let's talk logistics. Back in 1524, when Pizarro and his partners first set their sights on the riches of the Inca Empire, they needed serious capital to fund the venture. The cost of outfitting an expedition was staggering. They had to pool resources to hire ships, recruit men, and stockpile enough supplies to ensure they wouldn't end up as a cautionary tale. In today's money, we're talking millions of dollars just to get a few ships seaworthy and ready to rumble. But as Pizarro would soon learn, the real cost of conquest wasn't in gold or silver. It was in the human lives and the inevitable betrayal that came with such high stakes. As the trio set out for their first expedition to Peru, they were met not with glittering cities, but with harsh realities. The journey was beset with storms, disease, and the occasional skirmish with indigenous people who were understandably miffed about uninvited guests. By the time they returned to Panama, they were more bedraggled than triumphant. But Pizarro had seen enough to know that the rumors of a wealthy empire were no mere sailor's yarn. Like a seasoned gambler, he was ready to double down on his bet. Pizarro returned to Spain in 1528 to seek royal backing for another go at the Inca treasure. Here, his fortunes took a turn for the better. He managed to secure the support of the Spanish crown, obtaining the Capitulación de Toledo, which effectively gave him the green light to conquer Peru in the name of the king. This document was like a golden ticket, granting him the title of governor, captain general, and the rights to claim vast territories. It was a bureaucratic triumph that set the stage for one of the most audacious and brutal campaigns in history. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the Capitulacion painted Pizarro as a noble conquistador, the reality was far grittier. He was a man driven by ambition and greed, a product of his time. The Spanish Empire's exploration frenzy was less about spreading civilization and more about amassing wealth and power. For Pizarro, the conquest of the Incas was less about duty and more about personal gain and status. And as history would show, the cost of his ambition would be paid in blood. So there you have it, Francisco Pizarro, a man who rose from the shadows of obscurity to become one of history's most infamous conquerors. His story is a testament to the power of ambition and the lengths to which people will go to rewrite their destinies. But as we delve deeper into his exploits, remember this. The past is never as glamorous as it seems, and every legend has its shadows. And so, armed with a royal nard and a title that would make any social climber swoon, Pizarro was ready to make another run at the Incas. But before we get swept away by visions of valiant conquistadors charging into the unknown, let's take a reality check. Pizarro's early expeditions were less Indiana Jones and more Keystone Cops. Picture this, a ragtag band of adventurers, armed with dreams bigger than their armor and plans, held together by little more than wishful thinking. In 1524, Pizarro, along with his partners Almagro and Luke, set sail on their first official expedition towards the lands of the Incas. The mission, simple: find the riches rumored to be lying around like gold-plated Easter eggs. The reality: far from a treasure hunt in a gilded paradise, they encountered endless stretches of mosquito-infested swamp and hostile locals who weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Their small fleet, consisting of a couple of ships that were more floating tinderboxes than reliable vessels, struggled against the elements. The journey was a logistical nightmare from the get-go. Supplies dwindled faster than a teenager's phone battery, and morale dropped to basement levels. The explorers were forced to turn back before reaching their glittering goal, a retreat that was less strategic withdrawal and more get out before were completely wiped out. Undeterred by their first failure, our intrepid band of misfits regrouped. In 1526, after licking their wounds and somehow scraping together enough resources for a second attempt, they set out again. This time, they reached the northern shores of what is now Peru. The second expedition was not much better than the first, proving once again that Pizarro's ambitions were as resilient as his preparations were pathetic. Disease ravaged the group, and their numbers were further thinned by clashes with indigenous communities who were understandably peeved about these uninvited guests tramping through their lands. Now, here's where Pizarro's story takes a turn that only a skilled navigator of political waters could engineer. After the disastrous results of his initial forays, most would take the hint and find a new line of work. But Pizarro, with a tenacity that was either admirable or foolhardy, depending on how you look at it, returned to Spain to secure even firmer backing. This wasn't just about securing funds. It was about leveraging power and influence. In a masterstroke of diplomacy and cunning, Pizarro managed to bypass his original partners in securing the Capitulacion de Toledo. This royal decree was a golden ticket that not only legitimized his conquest plans, but also gave him an elevated status over his partners, leading to tension that would later play out like a Shakespearean drama with a lot more blood and fewer soliloquies. It's easy to see why the myth of the noble conquistador persists. A lone cavalier, braving the wild unknown, driven by destiny and the call of adventure. But the truth is far grittier. Pizarro and his crew were less about chivalry and more about opportunism. Their expeditions were driven by the promise of wealth and power, not the noble ideals often depicted in romanticized histories. The conquest was less a glorious endeavor and more a series of blunders, underscored by desperation and ruthlessness. The myth may be more appealing, but the reality is a cautionary tale about the lengths people will go for fortune and fame. As Pizarro set the stage for his third and ultimately successful attempt, the stakes grew higher. The Spanish crown expected results, and Pizarro's earlier failures loomed over him like the proverbial sword of Damocles. Yet, despite the bumbling beginnings, his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of politics and alliances was nothing short of Machiavellian. By securing royal backing and maneuvering through the complex web of colonial politics, Pizarro set his sights once more on the riches of the Inca Empire, determined to rewrite not just his destiny, but that of an entire continent. So here we are, on the brink of Pizarro's most audacious gamble yet. His early attempts, while laughable in their execution, laid the groundwork for one of history's most notorious conquests. But before we dive into that, let's remember that history is often written by the victors, and the tales they tell can be as misleading as a mirage in the desert. As we continue to unravel Pizarro's story, keep in mind that every legend has its shadows, and the truth, though less glamorous, is infinitely more compelling. So, with ambitions burning brighter than a bonfire at a pyromaniac's convention, Pizarro embarked on his third expedition in 1531. This time, he wasn't just winging it with a prayer and a pair of leaky boats. He had secured the Spanish crown's blessing, which was like having a golden seal of approval to do what he did best, conquer. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. This wasn't a full-blown military campaign with 1,000 men marching in lockstep. No, Pizarro's entourage was more like the cast of a low-budget adventure film. We're talking about 180 men, 27 horses, and a few cannons packed tighter than secrets at a royal court. Now, if you're wondering how 180 guys plan to take on an empire, you're not alone. It sounds more like a doomed frat party than a historic conquest, but therein lies the devilish brilliance of Pizarro's plan. He wasn't going to knock on the front door of the Inca Empire and demand entry. He was going to sneak in through the back, like a crafty fox in the henhouse. And thus, the expedition set sail from Panama towards the lands of the Incas, with Pizarro's eyes firmly fixed on the prize. Enter Atahualpa, the Inca emperor, a man whose fate was about to take a turn that not even the most imaginative soothsayer could have predicted. Atahualpa was fresh off a civil war victory against his half-brother Huascar, and he was probably thinking more about consolidating his power than dealing with a bunch of sunburnt Europeans. But fate has a funny way of intervening. Pizarro and his men made their way to the town of Cajamarca, where they hoped to have a little chat, or rather, a strategic ambush, with Atahualpa. The meeting between Pizarro and Atahualpa is one of those moments in history that sounds like it was ripped straight from a telenovela script. On November 16, 1532, Pizarro invited Atahualpa to a friendly gathering. By friendly, I mean it was a trap, complete with hidden soldiers poised to strike. Atahualpa, confident in his position and surrounded by thousands of his own warriors, decided to humor the newcomers. But he didn't just show up. He made an entrance that would make any diva proud. Carried on a litter, adorned with all the trappings of Inca royalty, Atahualpa was the very picture of imperial power, until he wasn't. As the story goes, a friar named Vicente de Valverde approached Atahualpa and offered him a Bible, declaring it contained the word of God. Atahualpa, either unimpressed or simply curious, tossed the book aside. That was all the pretext Pizarro needed. With a signal, the Spaniards launched their attack, a blitzkrieg of steel and gunpowder that left thousands of Incas dead and Atahualpa a captive. It was over in the blink of an eye, and what followed was a negotiation that would make Wall Street brokers weep with envy. The ransom for Atahualpa's release became the stuff of legend. You see, Atahualpa promised to fill a room measuring 22 feet long by 17 feet wide and 8 feet high with gold, and twice that amount in silver. We're talking about a treasure haul that would make Scrooge McDuck dive headfirst into his money bin. According to estimates, the ransom amounted to over 13,000 pounds of gold and 26,000 pounds of silver, a king's ransom in every sense of the term. Now, before you start picturing Pizarro swimming through piles of gold coins like a joyous prospector, remember this. The treasure wasn't just a jackpot for the conquistadors. It was a cultural and historical loss for the Incas, whose riches were melted down, losing invaluable artifacts and craftsmanship to the insatiable forge of Spanish greed. The allure of gold was powerful enough to blind men to the destruction they wrought, a theme as old as time itself. But back to Pizarro and his merry band of opportunists. With the ransom paid, one might think Atahualpa would be released as promised. But history has a way of turning promises into hollow echoes. Instead of setting Atahualpa free, Pizarro decided to hold onto his royal captive, eventually executing him in 1533 under the pretense of treason and plotting against the Spaniards. It was a move that was as brutal as it was predictable, revealing Pizarro's ruthless pragmatism. By now, Pizarro had effectively decapitated the leadership of the Inca Empire. His small band of adventurers had achieved what seemed impossible, the subjugation of a mighty civilization with nothing more than cunning and a healthy dose of treachery. The gold and silver they seized from Atahualpa's ransom were divided among the men, with Pizarro himself taking a lion's share, enough to make him one of the wealthiest men of his day. Yet, this wealth came at the cost of a civilization's heart and soul, a poignant reminder that the price of greed is often paid in blood and cultural erasure. As the dust settled on this chapter of conquest, Pizarro's ambitions continued to grow. He established Lima in 1535, intending it to be the new capital of Spanish Peru, a testament to his vision of empire building. But even as he carved out his dominion in the Andes, the specter of betrayal loomed large. His relationship with Diego de Almagro soured, leading to a power struggle that would eventually result in a bloody conflict between the former allies. The tale of Pizarro's conquest is one of audacity and ambition, a story where the lines between heroism and villainy blur into shades of grey. It's a reminder that history is written in the ink of those who wield power, but the truth often lies in the margins, waiting to be uncovered. As we move forward in this saga, remember that the lure of gold and glory can turn even the most humble of men into figures of infamy, their legacies etched into the annals of time by both the weight of their deeds and the shadows they cast. As Pizarro basked in his newfound power, it was clear that the seeds of chaos had been sown amidst the Andes. The subjugation of the Incas was less a neat ending and more the start of a soap opera featuring greed, betrayal, and yes, a touch of farce. The Spanish had a new playground, but it was one strewn with political landmines and a cast of characters who could rival the most ambitious of Machiavellian schemers. First off, let's talk about the spoils of conquest. After the gold was divvied up, Pizarro and his men weren't exactly popping champagne corks and singing "Cumbaya." Instead, they were eyeing each other like contestants on a reality show, waiting for someone to make a move. Division of Atahualpa's ransom was a logistical nightmare, akin to carving a turkey at Thanksgiving dinner, where everyone's armed and nobody's thankful. Not only did Pizarro walk away with a hefty share, equivalent to what some historians estimate as millions in today's dollars, but he also managed to alienate a good chunk of his comrades. And if history has taught us anything, it's that disgruntled allies are just ticking time bombs in a powder keg of ambition. Meanwhile, Pizarro set about establishing Lima, a city that was supposed to be a beacon of Spanish civilization, but more closely resembled a Wild West outpost with a touch of imperial flair. Founded in 1535, Lima was Pizarro's attempt to cement his legacy, but it also became a stage where the drama of colonial politics played out in real time. Think of it as the original House of Cards, but with more swords and significantly less subtlety. Now, on to the juicy bits, Pizarro's fallout with Diego de Almagro. Imagine Almagro, seasoned conquistador and Pizarro's erstwhile partner, simmering on the sidelines as Pizarro hogged the limelight, and more importantly, the loot. Their so-called partnership, which had started with promises of shared glory, soon devolved into a bitter rivalry. Almagro felt shortchanged, not just in gold, but in status and recognition. He wasn't wrong. The Capitulación de Toledo had effectively sidelined him, reducing his role in the conquest to that of a supporting actor in Pizarro's epic. The tension between these two was like a ticking bomb, ticking louder with each slight and perceived insult. Almagro, feeling every bit the jilted ally, eventually took matters into his own hands. In 1537, he seized Cusco, the heart of the Inca Empire, an audacious move that was as much about power as it was about sticking it to Pizarro. This act of defiance sparked a conflict that was part civil war, part tragicomedy, and entirely emblematic of the volatile nature of colonial politics. The confrontation between Pizarro and Almagro's forces, known as the Battle of Las Salinas in 1538, was less a heroic clash and more a grim reminder of the lengths to which people will go when ambition eclipses camaraderie. Almagro's defeat was swift, and in a move that was both predictable and brutal, he was captured and executed. So much for brotherhood and shared conquest. Almagro's end was a stark lesson in the cutthroat world of colonial expansion. With Almagro out of the picture, you'd think Pizarro could finally rest easy on his laurels, but the universe has a wicked sense of irony. Pizarro's string of betrayals and backstabbing was far from over. The seeds of his downfall were already taking root, nurtured by his insatiable greed and the simmering resentment of those he'd wronged. Enter the Olmegristas, a group of loyalists to the fallen Almagro who weren't about to let bygones be bygones. Their simmering resentment was a powder keg, and Pizarro was about to light the fuse. Meanwhile, the Spanish crown, far from the action, but ever eager to assert control, was growing increasingly worried about the levels of autonomy these conquistadors enjoyed. They were like unsupervised kids running amok in a candy store, and the crown wanted to rein them in before things spiraled further out of control. This tension between the conquistadors and the authorities back home added another layer of complexity to the already chaotic political landscape of the New World. In the midst of this turmoil, Pizarro's own kin weren't exactly models of loyalty either. His half-brother, Hernando Pizarro, was a man with ambitions as grand as Francisco's and scruples as questionable. Hernando's return to Spain in 1539 to defend their actions in the Americas before the king was less about clearing their name and more about consolidating power. The Pizarro brothers were like a dysfunctional family reunion where everyone's vying for the biggest piece of pie, and Hernando was determined not to be left out. Now, fast forward to 1541, and the curtain is about to fall on Francisco Pizarro's tumultuous career. The Olmegristas, driven by revenge and perhaps a touch of poetic justice, launched an attack on Pizarro's palace in Lima. It was an ambush worthy of its own Netflix series, sudden, brutal, and utterly final. Pizarro, once the master of cunning surprises, found himself on the receiving end. He was assassinated, leaving behind a legacy as tarnished as it was monumental. The aftermath of Pizarro's conquest was a tangled web where the lines between friend and foe blurred into oblivion. The power vacuum he left behind in Peru was quickly filled by a succession of rulers, each grappling with the daunting task of maintaining control over a land still reeling from the shock of conquest. The Spanish crown eventually imposed the new laws in 1542, a set of regulations aimed at protecting indigenous peoples and curtailing the power of encomenderos, those who held control over vast tracts of land and labor. But let's be real. These laws were about as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. They faced fierce resistance and were often ignored by the very people they were meant to govern. As for the Inca people, the long-term impacts of Pizarro's conquest were profound and devastating. The once thriving empire was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its culture and traditions forever altered by the relentless march of foreign domination. The riches that had lured Pizarro and his ilk were gone, melted into ingots, and shipped off to Spain, leaving behind a society struggling to adapt to the new reality imposed upon it. In the grand tapestry of history, Pizarro's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the unpredictable nature of human ambition. His rise and fall are reminders that while the allure of power and wealth can propel one to great heights, it can also lead to a spectacular and often inevitable downfall. As we move forward in this narrative, remember that the echoes of Pizarro's conquest still reverberate today, a testament to the enduring legacy of those who dared to rewrite history, no matter the cost. And so, with the stage set for the next act in this unfolding drama, we leave Pizarro's tale hanging on the precipice of history. His story is far from over, and as we delve deeper into the repercussions of his conquest, we'll uncover even more layers of intrigue, betrayal, and the indomitable human spirit that continues to shape our world. Stay tuned for more twists and turns as we continue our exploration of this tumultuous chapter in the annals of time. The tangled web of history, where ambition's echoes resonate long after the actors have exited the stage. Francisco Pizarro's story isn't just a tale of swords and gold. It's a saga of human folly, ambition, and the pernicious allure of power. As we dissect his legacy, let's pull back the curtain on the myths and confront the gritty reality that reshaped an entire continent. First up, let's talk about Pizarro's posthumous reputation. He's often painted as a fearless explorer, a man whose courage matched his cunning. But hold your applause, this isn't a standing ovation moment. Pizarro's conquest was less about valiant heroism and more about capitalizing on chaos. His so-called bravery was often just strategic opportunism dressed in armor. The real question isn't how he managed to conquer the Incas with a handful of men, but how the Inca Empire, already weakened by civil war and disease, became an easy target for exploitation. Now, let's debunk those romanticized tales of conquistadors as noble warriors. Pizarro was no knight in shining armor. He was more like a pirate with paperwork. The Capitulación de Toledo wasn't a chivalric charter. It was a legal loophole that allowed him to plunder with the crown's blessing. The reality of conquest was a brutal affair, where diplomacy meant trickery, and alliances were as fragile as a soap bubble. Pizarro's dealings were marred by double crossings and betrayal, not exactly the stuff of bedtime stories. Economics, the unsung hero, or villain, of history, played a pivotal role in Pizarro's exploits. The Spanish crown was cash-strapped, bleeding ducats from protracted wars in Europe. The New World wasn't just an adventurous escapade, it was a fiscal lifeline. Pizarro's treasure trove, primarily Atahualpa's ransom, was a godsend to Spain's coffers. We're talking about 13,000 pounds of gold and 26,000 pounds of silver, a haul that would make even the most miserly accountant smile. Yet, this wealth came at a staggering cost, not just in Inca lives, but in cultural obliteration. Speaking of culture, let's reflect on the impact Pizarro's actions had on the indigenous peoples of South America. The Incas, once the architects of a vast empire with roads that stretched over 25,000 miles and a sophisticated agricultural system, faced a seismic cultural shift. The introduction of European diseases decimated populations faster than any blade. Smallpox was the true conqueror, sweeping through the Andes with lethal efficiency. It wasn't just the loss of life that left scars, but the erasure of traditions, languages, and histories, bulldozed in the quest for gold. As Pizarro's story closes, we're left pondering the darkly humorous ironies of his life choices. Here's a man who clawed his way from obscurity to infamy, driven by the same ambitions that would ultimately lead to his downfall. His assassination by the very people he'd once called allies serves as a poetic full circle, a reminder that betrayal is a double-edged sword. The conquistador who outmaneuvered an empire couldn't dodge the dagger of vengeance. And what of the Spanish Empire? Pizarro's conquests expanded its territories, but they also sowed the seeds of its eventual decline. The influx of precious metals initially fueled Spain's economy, yet it also triggered rampant inflation, a classic case of too much of a good thing. The empire became a cautionary tale of wealth without sustainability, where short-term gains masked long-term instability. In the grand scheme of things, Pizarro's legacy is a mosaic of contradictions. He is both villain and visionary, a man whose choices reshaped continents, but left a legacy stained with blood and greed. His story is a testament to the human spirit's duality, the capacity for great achievement and equally great destruction. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that history isn't just a record of the past. It's a reflection of the choices we make and the shadows they cast. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. Pizarro's tale is a mirror, reflecting the timeless dance between ambition and morality. It's a reminder that the legends we create are often as flawed as the humans who live them, and the truth, though less romantic, is always more revealing. Sweet dreams, and may your own adventures be free of plunder and peril. In the annals of history, the Sassanian Empire often gets overshadowed by its more glamorous neighbors, like the Roman Empire, which had a flair for drama and toga parties. But the Sassanians, with their intricate carpets and penchant for architectural bling, deserve some serious airtime. So, let's set the scene in 224 CE. The Parthian Empire was experiencing what we might call a severe case of middle-aged crisis, with internal squabbles and a leadership style that could generously be termed as chaotic. The Parthians, once a formidable force, were now stumbling like your uncle after too many glasses of Shiraz, a family reunion. Enter Ardashir I, the man with a plan and a mighty fine crown to match. Born in the dusty heartlands of Persia, Ardashir wasn't just any ambitious upstart. He hailed from a lineage that claimed ties to the ancient Achaemenid kings, You know, the guys who built Persepolis and gave Greece a run for its money back in the day. Ardashir wasn't going to let a little thing like the declining Parthian power stop him. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity ripe for the taking, like finding a prime parking spot at the mall on Black Friday. Now, Ardashir's rise to power wasn't exactly a peaceful transition. This wasn't a friendly game of musical thrones. It was more like a hungry game of risk, complete with real armies and actual bloodshed. The Parthian Empire, under the rule of Artabanus Roman IV, was a fractured entity, suffering from a severe leadership vacuum and constant infighting among noble families. Ardashir, seizing this moment of vulnerability, decided to make his move. And boy, did he move fast. Ardashir launched a series of military campaigns that were as much about brains as they were about brawn. He started in his home province of Persis, modern-day Fars in Iran, where he had been quietly building his power base like a shrewd investor gathering capital. By 224 C, he had consolidated enough support to take on the Parthians directly. The decisive showdown came near the city of Hormozgan, where Ardashir faced off against Artabanus Roman IV. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for Artabanus. Ardashir emerged victorious, and with that victory, he declared the birth of a new empire. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing from there. Ardashir's path to power was strewn with more drama than a soap opera. He had to deal with rival claimants and disgruntled nobles, all while trying to knit together a patchwork of territories into a coherent empire. There were also those pesky Romans to the west, who were always game for a good skirmish. Yet, Ardashir was nothing if not persistent. He had a vision of restoring the glory of the Persian Empire, and he wasn't going to let a little thing like persistent warfare get in his way. Ardashir's early reign was characterized by rapid expansion and consolidation. He wasn't content with just sitting on his newly acquired throne, sipping wine and admiring his handiwork. No, he had plans, big plans. His empire building wasn't just about land grabs. It was about creating a centralized state with a coherent administration. Ardashir understood that to maintain his grip on power, he needed more than just military might. He needed a sophisticated bureaucratic system, and he set about creating one with the zeal of a startup founder. This period also saw the rise of Zoroastrianism as the state religion, with Ardashir promoting it as a unifying force across his territories. Think of it as the ancient version of a brand relaunch, with fire temples becoming as ubiquitous as Starbucks outlets. Zoroastrian priests gained significant influence, serving as both religious leaders and political advisors. This move wasn't just about piety. It was a clever strategy to consolidate power and create a shared cultural identity. Ardashir knew that a strong ideological foundation could hold his empire together, even when the going got tough. Economically, the Sassanian Empire started off on the right foot, benefiting from its geographically strategic position along the Silk Road. This wasn't just any road. It was the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime, providing a steady flow of trade goods and wealth. The Sassanians controlled key trade routes that connected the east and west, allowing them to rake in revenue from taxes and tolls. This influx of wealth fueled their ambitions and helped finance their military campaigns, grand construction projects, and of course, the upkeep of those luxurious Persian rugs that everyone seemed to covet. Ardashir's empire building wasn't just a personal vanity project. It laid the groundwork for a powerful dynasty that would last for over 4 centuries. His actions set the stage for the Sassanian Empire to become a dominant force in the region, one that would eventually come to blows with the might of Rome in a series of epic confrontations. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's appreciate the audacity of Ardashir's vision. He took a crumbling empire, a fading shadow of past glories, and transformed it into a powerhouse. Sure, he had to step over a few rivals and ruffle some noble feathers along the way. But isn't that the way of all great empire builders? Ardashir wasn't just about conquest for conquest's sake. He had a clear vision and a determination that would set the tone for the Sassanian Empire's future. By turning the ashes of the Parthian Empire into the foundation of his own, Ardashir cemented his legacy as a master strategist and a formidable leader. So, Ardashir had set the stage, but enter Shapur I, his son, who wasn't just content with playing second fiddle in the great Persian symphony. If Ardashir was the architect, Shapur was the interior designer with a penchant for grand visions and bold strokes. Shapur took the reins in 240 CE and was determined to crank the volume up on the Sassanian expansion. This wasn't about following in Dad's footsteps. It was about carving out his own legacy with the finesse of a maestro wielding a conductor's baton. Shapur's ambitions weren't just limited to a few border skirmishes. No, he had his eyes set on the Roman Empire, a formidable foe with an ego as large as its territory. Picture this, a young empire led by a ruler with a chip on his shoulder going head-to-head with Rome. It was like David and Goliath, except both were sporting full battle armor and a grudge the size of an elephant. Shapur wasn't just looking to expand his borders. He was out to make a statement, and he wasn't going to whisper it. He wanted the world to hear a resounding Persian roar. One of Shapur's most famous campaigns, and one that would make any ancient battlefield enthusiast swoon, took place in 260 CE. It was during this campaign that Shapur pulled off a move so audacious it would be the equivalent of a mic drop in the ancient world. He captured the Roman Emperor Valerian. Yes, you heard that right. An emperor, not just any run-of-the-mill general. This wasn't just a tactical win. It was the ultimate power play. When you can parade the Roman emperor through your streets as a prisoner, it's safe to say you've reached peak bragging rights. Valerian's capture wasn't just about Shapur flexing his muscles. It sent shockwaves through the Roman world. The Romans, who were used to being the ones doing the capturing, were now on the receiving end. For Shapur, this wasn't just a personal triumph, but a political goldmine. He solidified his position as a leader, gainfully leveraging this victory to boost the morale of his troops and the prestige of the Sassanian Empire. It was a masterclass in turning military success into political capital. But let's not get swept away by the romanticism of battlefield glory, because behind the glamour of military triumph was a web of infrastructure projects and economic strategies that underpinned Shapur's empire building. You see, wars are expensive, and Shapur knew that to keep his ambitions afloat, he needed a strong economic backbone. Cue the infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, canals. Shapur wasn't just building an empire, he was building the arteries that would pump lifeblood through it. The Sassanians understood that trade was the name of the game, and Shapur played it like a seasoned pro. The empire's geographic position was a veritable jackpot, sitting pretty on the Silk Road like a toll booth operator with a license to print money. Shapur implemented economic policies that facilitated trade and taxed goods passing through his empire, effectively turning the Silk Road into a Persian piggy bank. This wasn't just about collecting tolls. It was about creating a sustainable revenue stream that could fund his military conquests and civic projects alike. Shapur's projects included the construction of cities and monumental buildings that showcased the empire's wealth and sophistication. The city of Bishapur, with its elaborate palaces and intricate reliefs, was a testament to Shapur's vision. It was less about a place to rest your head and more about a statement of imperial grandeur. These projects weren't just vanity exercises. They were investments in the empire's future, creating jobs and boosting the local economy. Underpinning all this was a solid administrative framework that Ardashir had begun, but Shapur perfected. He expanded the bureaucracy, ensuring that tax collection was efficient and that the empire's vast resources were managed effectively. The Sassanians weren't just slapping together a haphazard empire. They were creating a well-oiled machine designed to stand the test of time. Shapur understood that an empire without a strong administrative backbone was like a chariot without wheels, doomed to stall at the first hurdle. Of course, even the best-laid plans have their myths and legends. Stories of Shapur's reign are peppered with tales of his supposed superhuman abilities and divine favor. While these tales make for great fireside stories, the reality was that Shapur's success was grounded in strategy, not sorcery. He was a ruler who understood the importance of optics and used them to his advantage. By weaving his narrative into the fabric of the empire, Shapur ensured that his legacy would endure long after the dust of his battles had settled. In a world where empires rose and fell like the tides, Shapur's reign was a testament to the power of vision and determination. He took the foundation laid by his father and built upon it with the precision of a master craftsman. Under his rule, the Sassanian Empire wasn't just a regional power. It was a force to be reckoned with on the world stage. The capture of Valerian was a headline-grabbing event, But it was the economic and infrastructural policies that truly cemented Shapor's place in history. Yet, the story of the Sassanian Empire under Shapur I is far from over. As we delve deeper into the legacy of his reign, we'll uncover more about the complexities of managing an empire that spanned diverse cultures and landscapes. Shapur's story is one of ambition and achievement, but also of the challenges that come with ruling an empire at its zenith. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of the Sassanian Empire, a tale of power, politics, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. So, with Shapur I's ambitions and infrastructural innovations setting the stage, it's time to peel back the gilded layers of the Sassanian Empire's so-called Golden Age. Let's face it, every empire loves a good PR campaign, and the Sassanians were no different. They had their own version of Instagram filters, crafting a narrative of prosperity and cultural sophistication. But dig a bit deeper, and you'll find a story that's as complex as a Persian rug, beautiful on the surface, but with a few snags underneath. First off, let's talk about the Sassanian cultural renaissance. This wasn't just a time of great art and architecture. It was a full-blown cultural explosion that would have made even the Romans raise an eyebrow in envy. The empire's capital, Ctesiphon, became a hub of artistic innovation. Picture a city that was to the ancient world what New York is to Broadway, where playwrights and artists rubbed shoulders with philosophers and theologians. The Sassanians took great pride in their cultural achievements, and who could blame them? They left behind some seriously impressive stuff, like intricate rock reliefs and grandiose palaces. But for every magnificent triumphal arch, there was a tax bureaucrat scribbling away in some dingy office, trying to make sense of the empire's finances. Speaking of finances, the Sassanian tax system was a bit like a bad reality TV show, full of drama, confusion, and the occasional scandal. The empire's wealth came not just from trade, but also from a robust taxation system that would make modern accountants break out in hives. They taxed everything from land to livestock, and even the humble date palm wasn't spared. If it existed, it was taxed. The revenues funded grand projects and kept the military machine well-oiled, but they also put a strain on the average farmer who probably felt like he was funding the emperor's next palace single-handedly. Now, let's get into the thick of it with religious policies. Zoroastrianism was more than just the empire's official state religion. It was the cultural glue that held diverse peoples together. Picture a society where fire temples were as common as coffee shops, and priests wielded as much power as politicians. The Sassanians elevated Zoroastrianism to new heights, with the priests, or magi, serving as advisors to the king and wielding considerable influence in state affairs. This wasn't just about spirituality. It was a strategic move to unify the empire under a single religious banner. But with great power came great responsibility, and occasionally great corruption. Religious intolerance was an unfortunate reality of the time. While Zoroastrianism flourished, other religious communities, like Christians and Mycenaeans, often faced persecution. The Sassanians were masters of the us vs. them narrative, and religious minorities found themselves on the wrong side of it more often than not. This wasn't just about theological differences. It was a way to consolidate power and control. The empire's rulers were savvy enough to know that a divided populace could be more easily managed, even if it meant a few burning heretics along the way. So, how does all this tie into the myth of the Sassanian Golden Age? Well, the empire's leaders were adept at highlighting their cultural achievements while sweeping the less savory aspects under the proverbial Persian rug. The narrative of a prosperous, enlightened empire was one they were eager to promote, but it glossed over the harsh realities faced by the common folk. Economic disparity was a persistent issue, with wealth concentrated in the hands of the elite, while the masses toiled under the weight of taxes and strict religious oversight. Bureaucratic inefficiencies were another thorn in the empire's side. The Sassanian administrative system was like a grand, sprawling tapestry with a few loose threads threatening to unravel the whole thing. On paper, it was a marvel of organization, but in practice, it often fell victim to corruption and inefficiency. Imagine trying to keep track of an empire that stretched from the Arabian desert to the Hindu Kush with nothing more than parchment and ink. Mistakes were bound to happen, and when they did, they had a nasty habit of snowballing into full-blown crises. Yet, despite these challenges, the Sassanian Empire endured. It was a testament to the resilience of its people and the vision of its rulers. They managed to create a society that was as vibrant as it was volatile, a place where the arts flourished, and philosophical debates raged long into the night. It was a time of great achievements and equally great contradictions, where the lines between myth and reality blurred like the desert horizon. In the end, the Sassanian Golden Age was less about perfection and more about the pursuit of it. It was a time when the empire reached for the stars, even as it grappled with the weight of its earthly troubles. As we continue to explore this fascinating period, remember, history is messy, and the Sassanians were no exception. Their legacy is a complex tapestry of triumphs and tribulations, one that continues to captivate and confound us to this day. So buckle up, because the ride through history is far from over, and the best is yet to come. Ah, the Sassanian Empire, where every triumph is a tapestry and every setback a hidden thread. As the empire strived for greatness, it entered an era often dubbed as the Sassanian Renaissance. If you're thinking this was all about Michelangelo-esque figures chiseling away at marble statues, think again. This was more about scientific breakthroughs, architectural wonders, and a few kings with flair as extravagant as their names. Enter Khosrow I, also known as Anushirvan, or of the immortal soul. Talk about a name that sets some high expectations. Khosrow I hit the scene in 531 CE, and his reign was a masterclass in juggling military campaigns and cultural patronage. Think of him as a Renaissance man with a sword in one hand and a scroll in the other. This guy wasn't just about flexing military muscle. He was all about fostering a golden age of intellectual and cultural prosperity. Let's kick off with those architectural marvels. Khosrow I had a knack for construction projects that were more than just eyesores for future archaeologists to ponder over. Consider the Tak Khasra, the grand palace arch in Ctesiphon, which, at 37 meters high, was the tallest single-span vault of its time. It was a statement piece, a look what we can do architectural flex that made sure everyone knew the Sassanians were not just playing in Rome's shadow. But these buildings weren't just there for show, like oversized lawn ornaments. They were centers of learning and administration, reinforcing Khosrow's vision of a centralized, efficient state. You see, for Khosrow, infrastructure was power, and a well-paved road was as important as any battalion of soldiers. The empire's roads and bridges didn't just move armies, they moved ideas and goods, knitting a sprawling realm into a cohesive whole. And speaking of ideas, let's dive into the scientific and intellectual achievements. Khosrow I was a fan of the classics, but he wasn't content with just reading them. He wanted to surpass them. The Academy of Gundishapur, a hub of learning that rivaled Alexandria's great library, became a melting pot of knowledge. With scholars from Greece, India, and beyond, it was the ancient world's version of a supergroup, like the traveling Wilburys with more scrolls and fewer guitars. These scholars weren't just sitting around, reciting Aristotle. They were crunching numbers, developing new medical techniques, and even dabbling in what we might now call psychology. The Sassanians were particularly interested in the works of Indian scholars, importing texts on mathematics and astronomy. They didn't just translate these works, they expanded on them, proving that cultural exchange is the original remix. Khosrow I also had a bit of a flair for economic innovation. He reformed the tax system, which might not sound as glamorous as building a giant arch, but was crucial all the same. Under his rule, taxes were collected systematically, which was a refreshing change from the previous guess and hope approach. This efficiency ensured that funds flowed smoothly into the imperial coffers, financing everything from military campaigns to those ever-important infrastructure projects. Now, while Khosrow I was polishing the empire's cultural credentials, he didn't forget the military side of things. After all, an empire without a robust defense is like a castle made of sand, beautiful but doomed to crumble. He reorganized the military, creating a professional standing army that was ready to spring into action faster than you can say Sassanian supremacy. This wasn't just about expanding territories. It was about ensuring stability within the empire's borders. But let's not wax too lyrical about Khosrow I. For all his achievements, his reign wasn't all sunshine and roses. The specter of war loomed large, and the empire was constantly on its toes, dealing with internal strife and external threats. The Byzantine Empire was a perennial thorn in Persia's side, and the two powers engaged in a series of costly and exhausting wars. These weren't just your run-of-the-mill border skirmishes. They were drawn-out conflicts that drained resources and tested Khosrow's leadership. And let's not forget the internal political intrigues. The Sassanian court was a hotbed of gossip and backstabbing, with nobles jostling for power like contestants on a cutthroat reality show. Khosrow had to keep his wits about him, navigating this treacherous landscape while maintaining the loyalty of his court and the army. His reign might have been a cultural renaissance, but it was also a tightrope walk across a pit of vipers. Despite these challenges, Khosrow's legacy is hard to overstate. He laid the groundwork for an empire that, while it would eventually fall, left an indelible mark on history. His reign was a balancing act between war and peace, culture and conquest, tradition and innovation. It was a time when the Sassanian Empire wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, carving out a place in history that would echo through the ages. So, as we turn the pages on this chapter of Sassanian history, remember that the empire's renaissance was more than just a golden age of culture and science. It was a testament to the power of vision, resilience, and the occasional well-timed bit of political maneuvering. The empire struck back, indeed, and it did so with style, smarts, and a healthy dose of that indomitable Persian spirit. Stay tuned, because the next act in the Sassanian saga is just around the corner, and it's one you won't want to miss. As we turn the page to the final chapter of the Sassanian saga, it's time to discuss the empire's descent from its golden peak, a tale filled with more drama than a soap opera finale. No empire lasts forever, and the Sassanians were no exception. Amidst the splendor of palaces and the hum of scholarly debate, the seeds of decline had been quietly sown, waiting for the right storm to bring it all crashing down. First, let's talk internal strife. By the time Khosrow Roman II took the throne in 590 CE, the empire was as stable as a three-legged stool. His reign was marked by a dizzying array of plots and counterplots. Think Game of Thrones, but with more exotic costumes and fewer dragons. Khosrow Roman II, often called Parvez, meaning victorious, had a knack for turning victory into a Pyrrhic prize. Despite initial military successes, his reign was marred by civil unrest and a revolving door of courtly betrayals. It's hard to maintain an empire when your advisors are auditioning for the role of Brutus. Economically, the empire was feeling the pinch. War is expensive, and not just in terms of morale. The prolonged conflicts with the Byzantines drained the treasury faster than you could say imperial overdraft. The once bustling Silk Road had become a shadow of its former self, with trade routes disrupted by constant warfare and shifting political alliances. Merchants weren't exactly lining up to pay tolls when bandits were offering free samples of robbery at every turn. And then there were the external threats, the grim reapers of empire. In the early 7th century, the Sassanians faced the full force of a burgeoning Islamic caliphate. The Arab conquests began as a series of skirmishes, but quickly turned into a full-blown invasion, like a snowball that evolves into an avalanche. By 636 C, the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah sealed the empire's fate. The Sassanian army, once the pride of Persia, was crushed, and with it, the empire's heart was ripped out. The Arabs, led by the tenacious forces of the Rashidun Caliphate, were more than just a passing storm. They were a cataclysmic shift in the regional power dynamic. Khosrow Roman II assassination in 628 CE, orchestrated by his own son, Kavad Roman II, was the final nail in the coffin. Talk about a family feud gone horribly wrong. Kavad's reign, if you can call it that, was a brief blip, lasting only a few months before he was snuffed out by the same whirlwind of chaos that brought him to power. The empire descended into a state of rapid succession and instability, with rulers coming and going like seasonal fashions. It was a carousel of power that left the empire dizzy and disoriented. By 651 C, the once mighty Sassanian Empire was reduced to ashes, its last emperor, Yazdijerd Roman III, fleeing like a shadow chased by the dawn. The final blow came not with a grand battle, but with a whimper. The death of Yazdijerd Roman III marked the official end of the Sassanian line. The empire's lands were absorbed into the rapidly expanding Islamic caliphate, its culture and people woven into the rich tapestry of what would become a new era in Middle Eastern history. Now, let's take a step back. and consider the legacy of the Sassanian Empire. Sure, it ended with a dramatic fall, but it left a lasting imprint on history. The Sassanians were masters of cultural synthesis, creating an empire that was a melting pot of Persian, Hellenistic, Indian, and local influences. Their contributions to art, architecture, and science didn't vanish with their empire. They were absorbed and adapted by their successors, echoing through the corridors of time. The empire's bureaucratic innovations, particularly in tax collection and administration, laid the groundwork for later empires. Even the caliphs who conquered them recognized the value of a well-run state and adopted many Sassanian practices. The Sassanians understood that governance was an art form, one that required as much finesse as any military maneuver. And let's not forget the religious legacy. Zoroastrianism, though it lost its status as a state religion, continued to influence spiritual traditions and philosophical thought. The ideas of duality and cosmic struggle found echoes in later religious and cultural narratives, showing that even in defeat, the Sassanians left their mark on the world. So, what does the rise and fall of the Sassanian Empire teach us about the cyclical nature of history and empires? For one, it's a reminder that every empire, no matter how grand, has its sunset. The forces that build an empire, ambition, innovation, and vision, can just as easily turn against it when unchecked by humility and adaptability. The Sassanians showed us that while battles can be won and lost, the true test of an empire's legacy is how it echoes through the ages. The Sassanian Empire's story is a testament to the resilience of human ambition and the fragility of power. It's a saga of triumph and tragedy, of dreams realized and dreams dashed. It reminds us that history is a living tapestry, woven from the threads of countless lives and legacies, each contributing to the pattern of human experience. So, as we close the book on the Sassanian Empire, let's carry forward the lessons it offers. In the end, the true measure of an empire is not its wealth or territories, but the enduring impact it leaves on the world, a legacy that, like the intricate designs of a Persian rug, remains long after the empire itself has faded into the annals of history. And with that, we bid farewell to the Sassanians, a civilization that, despite its fall, continues to inspire, intrigue, and illuminate our understanding of the past. The sun rises over the vast expanse of the Mongolian steppe, a landscape so stark and windswept it could intimidate even the most steadfast soul. Yet for you, a young Temujin, future Genghis Khan, this is home. Born in 1162, your early life is less about royal comforts and more about the harsh lessons taught by survival. At the tender age of 9, your father, Yesujay, is poisoned by rival Tartars, leaving you and your family at the mercy of the wild. Talk about a tough start, right? Now, contrary to popular belief, you're not merely a roughneck with a penchant for pillaging. The Mongolian society of your time is a complex tapestry of clans and tribes, each with their own intricate web of alliances and enmities. It's like the world's most treacherous game of Risk, where everyone is your neighbor, and every neighbor has a sword. Your early years teach you that trust is rarer than gold, and survival often means bending the rules or, more often, rewriting them entirely. Your mother, Holan, is a force to be reckoned with, and she teaches you the art of resilience. It's not just about enduring the brutal winters and scarce resources. It's about understanding human nature. This isn't some noble savage tale. Your upbringing is a crash course in power dynamics, and you're learning fast. By the time you're in your teens, you've grasped the importance of alliances and the power of charisma. You're not just a future conqueror. You're a budding diplomat with a knack for reading people like a scroll. Let's bust a myth right here. The Mongols aren't just marauding hordes rampaging across the continent. Sure, they've got a reputation for being a bit, shall we say, aggressive, but there's a brain behind the brawn. Your people have a sophisticated understanding of trade and diplomacy, honed by centuries of living at the crossroads of civilizations. The Silk Road isn't just a fancy name. It's a lifeline, and your ancestors have been navigating its complexities long before you were a twinkle in your mother's eye. Think of the Mongol economy as an early version of globalization. You and your kin are experts at extracting value from the land, trading livestock, and handcrafted goods for silks and spices. It's not just about taking what you want. It's about knowing what others want and using it to your advantage. You're the original networkers, the LinkedIn of the 12th century, if you will. And in this world, knowledge is as valuable as any treasure. Yet, despite this thriving exchange, the steppe is no utopia. It's a land where wealth is measured in horses, and justice is often meted out at the point of a spear. Your early experiences teach you that leadership isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who listens the best. As you grow, you refine your understanding of power, learning to wield it not with brute force alone, but with cunning and strategy. It's this combination that sets you apart from the rest, like a chess player thinking 5 moves ahead. Your world is governed by a code of honor, a complex set of traditions known as the Yasa. It's part law, part philosophy, and all Mongol. Think of it as the ultimate guide to life on the steppe, covering everything from theft to hospitality. It's not about draconian control, but maintaining order in a world where chaos lurks just beyond the horizon. You're already considering how to use such principles to unify the disparate tribes, a dream that seems almost impossible, but one that you're determined to realize. And speaking of dreams, let's talk about your vision. You're not content with the status quo. The idea of uniting the Mongol tribes isn't just about power, it's about creating a legacy. It's about transforming the steppe from a battleground to an empire. But first, there's the small matter of gathering support. You start with the blood bond, or anda, a brotherhood pact that's thicker than any contract. It's like making a lifelong friendship official with a handshake and a lot of mutual respect. Your first such bond is with Jamaka, a relationship that will shape your destiny in ways you can't yet imagine. Yet, as you rise through the ranks, you realize that not everyone is thrilled about your ambitions. Jealousy and fear breed enemies faster than you can count, and alliances shift like sand dunes in a storm. But you're no stranger to adversity. Your leadership style evolves, becoming a blend of ruthless efficiency and unexpected mercy. You show loyalty to those who follow you, and unyielding wrath to those who betray you. It's a balancing act worthy of a tightrope walker, but you're determined to make it work. As you grow older, your vision begins to take shape. You see beyond the immediate struggles to a future where the Mongol tribes are united not just by a common enemy, but by a shared purpose. The idea of an empire, a single, cohesive entity, is as radical as it is audacious. But you're not one to shy away from a challenge. You've tasted the bitterness of betrayal and the sweetness of victory, and you know that nothing worth having comes easy. In the end, what sets you apart isn't just your ability to wage war, but your capacity to inspire. You're not just creating an army, you're building a nation. And while the world may remember the Mongols for their conquests, you know that the real story is one of resilience, innovation, and adaptability. It's about turning adversity into opportunity and transforming the impossible into the inevitable. As the sun sets over the steppe, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, you stand ready to embark on the next phase of your journey. The road ahead is fraught with challenges, but you've never been one to back down from a fight. With a heart full of fire and a mind sharpened by experience, you're prepared to carve out your place in history, one step and one conquest at a time. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the steppe, you know it's time to rally your forces for what lies ahead. You're not just about to wage war, you're about to redefine it. This isn't some ordinary clash of swords. This is the Mongol way, where brains and brawn dance an intricate waltz across the battlefield. And contrary to popular belief, your strategies are more complex than a mere charge into enemy lines with a loud huzzah. Let's talk tactics. The Mongol army isn't just a collection of wild horsemen riding into battle with reckless abandon. Oh no, it's a well-oiled machine with precision and discipline that would make even the most seasoned general green with envy. Take the famous feigned retreat, for instance. It's not a spontaneous scramble for safety. It's a calculated move, a masterclass in psychological warfare. Your troops pretend to retreat, luring the enemy into a false sense of victory. Then, like a thunderstorm on a hot summer day, they turn around and strike when their foes least expect it. Surprise. It's like the ultimate game of hide and seek, but with much higher stakes. And let's not forget about the logistics. Keeping a massive army on the move is no small feat, especially when your supply chain consists of thousands of horses and the occasional yak. But here's where the Mongols shine. Mobility is your middle name. You've mastered the art of living off the land, a skill honed by generations of nomadic life. Your soldiers aren't just warriors, they're self-sufficient survivalists. They can ride for days, covering up to 100 miles in a single stretch, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a stomach full of dried meat and fermented mare's milk. It's not exactly gourmet, but it gets the job done. Meanwhile, your communication network is as fast as your horses. Relay stations, known as Yam, dart the landscape, allowing messages to travel with lightning speed. Need to send a dispatch to your generals miles away? No problem. A series of riders will deliver it swiftly, ensuring that your army acts as a cohesive unit, no matter the distance. It's like the Pony Express, but a few centuries ahead of its time. Now, let's debunk another myth. The Mongols aren't just about brute force. You wield intelligence like a sword. Spies and scouts are your secret weapons, gathering crucial information about enemy positions and terrain. You know that knowledge is power, and in your hands, it's as deadly as any arrow. Your scouts report back with details that let you plan every move with surgical precision. You're not just reacting to events, you're anticipating them, staying one step ahead of your adversaries like a master chess player. Of course, not everyone is thrilled about the Mongol way of war. For your enemies, it's like facing an unstoppable force of nature. But for you, it's an art form, a symphony of strategy and chaos orchestrated to devastating effect. And as you carve your path across the continent, you're not just expanding your empire, you're reshaping the landscape of warfare itself. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. There's a brutal reality beneath the surface. The Mongol conquests are as ruthless as they are effective. Cities that resist are often met with grim fates, their populations decimated as a warning to others. It's a harsh strategy, but one that underscores your message. Resistance is futile. Yet, there's a pragmatic side to this. By establishing such a fearsome reputation, you often win battles without drawing a sword. The mere mention of your name is enough to make some cities throw open their gates in surrender. It's the ultimate form of psychological warfare, victory through reputation. And while your enemies may see you as a harbinger of doom, there's another side to this coin. You're not just conquering, you're building. Under your rule, the Silk Road flourishes, trade routes open, and cultural exchange thrives. You're not just a warrior, you're a statesman, creating a legacy that stretches beyond the battlefield. You're uniting disparate tribes under a single banner, forging an empire that will be remembered long after the dust of war has settled. As the night deepens and your army prepares for the next campaign, you stand at the cusp of greatness. The world is your stage, and you're ready to play your part with all the flair and audacity that only a Mongol Khan can muster. With each conquest, you're not only expanding your realm, but challenging the very way people think about power and leadership. And as you look toward the horizon, you know that the best is yet to come. As you stand on the brink of history, the Mongol Empire isn't just a sprawling expanse of conquered lands. It's a living organism, pulsating with the lifeblood of 1,000 different cultures, languages, and traditions. And at the heart of this beast lies the Yasa, the Mongol code of laws, your secret weapon in maintaining order across an empire that spans continents. Think of the Yasa as the Mongol version of a Swiss Army knife, multifunctional, ruthlessly efficient, and indispensable in a pinch. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. The Yasa isn't some dusty old scroll gathering cobwebs in a forgotten yurt. It's a dynamic set of principles, passed down orally, that governs everything from military discipline to social conduct. It's like the ultimate cheat sheet for empire building. Need a quick reminder on how to deal with thieves? There's a Yasa for that. Wondering how to treat envoys from distant lands? Yasa's got you covered. It's not just about maintaining control. It's about creating a uniform system in a world where chaos is always lurking just beyond the horizon. But don't mistake the Yasa for a fairy tale code of chivalry. This isn't Camelot, and you're no King Arthur. The Yasa is as much about instilling fear as it is about promoting justice. It's the iron fist in the velvet glove, ensuring that everyone from the lowliest peasant to the loftiest Khan knows their place. Punishments are swift and often brutal, designed to leave an impression deep enough to last a lifetime, or end it. Steal a horse. Well, hope you like the idea of losing a head. It's a harsh world, and the Yasa is there to remind everyone that stepping out of line isn't just frowned upon, it's fatal. This brings us to the infamous brutality of Mongol conquests. Yes, the Mongols have a rep for being, shall we say, less than gentle. But let's set the record straight. This isn't mindless mayhem. It's a calculated strategy that's as cold as a Siberian winter. When the Mongols roll into town, the choice is simple: surrender or suffer. Resist, and you might find your city reduced to ashes, your population decimated. Consider the city of Nishapur, which defied the Mongols in 1221. In response, your forces obliterated it, leaving as many as 7 million dead. That's right, 7 million. It's a staggering figure, a grim statistic that serves as a warning to others who might consider defiance. But here's the kicker. This fearsome reputation means that often you don't need to lift a finger to achieve victory. The mere mention of the approaching Mongol horde is enough to make some cities throw open their gates, eager to avoid the fate that befell their less cooperative neighbors. It's the ultimate psychological warfare: victory without battle, conquest without casualties, on your side at least. Now, before you start thinking the Mongols are nothing but a medieval horror story, let's talk about the other side of the coin. The Mongol Empire isn't just a banner of destruction, it's a beacon of progress. Under this vast dominion, the Silk Road thrives like never before, a bustling artery of commerce connecting east and west. Trade flows freely, enriching cities and cultures alike. You're not just conquering, you're building bridges, metaphorically speaking, of course, because actual bridges would be a logistical nightmare. And while we're busting myths, let's dispel the notion that Mongol society is a free-for-all of pillaging and chaos. There's a method to the madness, a structure beneath the surface that keeps the wheels of empire turning smoothly. At the top of this hierarchy sits the Khan, yours truly, followed by a web of loyal generals and regional leaders who keep the peace in your name. It's a well-oiled machine, with each cog playing a vital role in maintaining the fragile balance of power. The Yasa plays a crucial role here, too, ensuring that even the most distant outpost is bound by the same set of rules. It's about creating a sense of unity, a shared identity that transcends tribal loyalties. This isn't just about ruling with an iron fist. It's about forging a new kind of empire, one that can withstand the test of time. And let's not forget the economic powerhouse you've created. The Mongol Empire is a vast marketplace, a melting pot where goods, ideas, and cultures intermingle. Silk from China, spices from India, gold from the Middle East. It's all part of the rich tapestry that makes up your realm. You're not just a conqueror, you're a patron of trade, a promoter of prosperity. It's globalization before the term even existed, a testament to the interconnectedness of the medieval world. Of course, none of this would be possible without the loyalty of your subjects. And here's another twist in the tale. While the Mongols are feared conquerors, they're also surprisingly tolerant rulers. You don't impose your beliefs on the conquered. Instead, you allow them to keep their customs and religions, fostering a sense of stability and loyalty. It's a clever move, one that ensures the wheels of empire keep turning smoothly, even in the farthest reaches of your domain. As the empire expands, so too does your vision of what it can become. You're not content with mere conquest. You want to create a legacy that endures long after you're gone. You're building an empire that's not just about power, but about progress, about connecting the world in ways that had never been imagined. As the night deepens and the stars begin to twinkle in the vast Mongolian sky, you stand on the precipice of greatness. The world is your oyster, and you're ready to shuck it with all the flair and audacity that only a Mongol Khan can muster. With each conquest, you're not just expanding your realm, you're reshaping the very way people think about power, leadership, and empire. And as you look toward the horizon, you know that the best is yet to come. As the Mongol Empire stretches its sinewy fingers across the vastness of Asia, it's not just about accumulating land and power. Oh no, it's about something far more influential, controlling the beating heart of medieval commerce, the Silk Road. Now, we're not talking about some mere dirt path. This was the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime, and you, savvy conqueror that you are, have the golden key to unlock its riches. Let's dive into the economic tapestry here. The Silk Road wasn't just a single route, but a complex network of trade paths spanning approximately 4,000 miles, linking the east with the west. Picture it: exotic silks, shimmering spices, and the twinkle of precious stones all flowing like a river of wealth through your empire. The Mongols, often painted as destroyers in the historical gallery, were in fact the ultimate trade facilitators. They made the Silk Road safer than it had been in centuries, turning it into the medieval superhighway of cultural exchange. Now, here's a juicy detail. Under your watchful eye, the Silk Road became a toll-free zone. That's right, you abolished the myriad petty tariffs that once lined the route like so many greedy toll booths. This move wasn't born out of charity but shrewdness. By eliminating these fees, you encouraged a greater volume of trade, which meant more goods, more ideas, and yes, more taxes flowing into your coffers. See, not just a sword swinger, but an economic visionary. And let's talk about the innovation that came with this boom. The Mongols were like the Silicon Valley of the steppes, spreading technology faster than a meme goes viral today. Take paper, for example. Originally a Chinese invention, it spread westward under your rule, revolutionizing record-keeping and communication. You could say the Mongols had a hand in the early development of bureaucracy. Cue the groans from future office workers. But the Mongol impact wasn't just technological, it was cultural. Imagine Marco Polo, that famed Venetian merchant, journeying through your lands in the late 13th century. Thanks to your policies, he encountered a world where East met West in a dizzying dance of ideas and traditions. Polo and his ilk weren't just tourists, they were cultural conduits, carrying knowledge of everything from Persian astronomy to Chinese printing techniques back to Europe. Talk about a one-man TED talk. Now, let's debunk a myth, the Mongols as mere plunderers. Sure, there was a bit of looting here and there. Okay, maybe a lot. But the real treasure was intellectual. The Mongols had a knack for recognizing talent and innovation, regardless of its origin. They plucked scholars, craftsmen, and engineers from conquered lands like rare fruits, seeding them throughout the empire. This wasn't just multiculturalism, it was strategic brilliance. Your empire was a melting pot long before the term existed. And while we're mixing metaphors, let's not forget about the postal system, the yam. This wasn't your average medieval mail service. It was a high-speed network of relay stations ensuring that a message could traverse your empire at breakneck speed. Need to send a note from Karakoram to Baghdad? No problem. The yam could cover that 500-mile journey in a matter of weeks. It was the Mongol equivalent of fiber optics, keeping your diverse empire interconnected and informed. But here's the kicker. The Mongols didn't just facilitate the spread of goods and ideas. They also spread peace, or at least a version of it. Under your Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road became a relatively safe passageway, free from the banditry that had plagued it for centuries. This stability was a byproduct of your iron-fisted rule, demonstrating that even a feared conqueror could play the role of peacemaker. It's a paradox of power. The same force that could raise cities could also secure prosperity. Of course, all this progress wasn't without its darker side. The Mongol legacy was built on a foundation of blood, conquest, and relentless expansion. Cities that resisted faced annihilation, and those that complied became part of your sprawling empire. But here's the twist. The very fear you instilled also paved the way for progress. By ensuring the flow of goods and ideas, you inadvertently set the stage for a more interconnected world. And speaking of connections, let's not overlook the unintended consequences of this global interaction, namely, the spread of the Black Death. Sure, it sounds like a medieval horror novel, but it was real and devastating. The bubonic plague hitched a ride on the very trade routes you nurtured, sweeping across Europe and Asia in the mid-14th century, killing an estimated 25 million people in Europe alone. It's a grim reminder that with great connectivity comes great responsibility, or at least great risk. Yet, despite the dark chapters, the Mongol era marked a turning point in global history. Your empire wasn't just about conquest, it was about laying the groundwork for the modern world. The cultural and technological exchanges fostered under your reign were like seeds planted in fertile soil, eventually sprouting into the Renaissance, the age of exploration, and beyond. As the stars twinkle over the vast expanse of your empire, you stand at the intersection of past and future, a bridge between worlds. The legacy you've begun will ripple through history, challenging the notion that the Mongols were merely agents of destruction. Instead, you emerge as architects of a new order, one where the exchange of ideas and goods shapes the destiny of nations. And as you look out across the horizon, you know that while the road ahead is fraught with challenges, it also holds the promise of a future rich with possibility. The Mongol Empire, a testament to the power of vision, innovation, and sheer audacity, will endure as a symbol of what can be achieved when the world comes together, even under the shadow of conquest. As you look out across the horizon, you know that while the road ahead is fraught with challenges, it also holds the promise of a future rich with possibility. The Mongol Empire, a testament to the power of vision, innovation, and sheer audacity, will endure as a symbol of what can be achieved when the world comes together, even under the shadow of conquest. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Mongol Empire has become the stuff of legend, a sprawling tale that's enthralled historians and Hollywood directors alike. But while the romanticized vision paints you as the ultimate warrior king, wielding both sword and strategy with unmatched skill, the reality is a bit more, shall we say, nuanced. Let's dive into that delightful mix of myth and reality, shall we? First off, let's tackle the elephant, or rather the warhorse, in the room. The myth of the Mongol Empire as an unstoppable force of pure destruction. Sure, your conquests were the medieval equivalent of a wrecking ball, but they were also a masterclass in logistics and diplomacy. You didn't just raise cities and ride off into the sunset. You laid the groundwork for an empire that, at its height, covered nearly 9 million square miles. That's right, 9 million. If you think managing a household is tough, try administrating a landmass larger than the moon's surface. Here's the inconvenient truth that's often glossed over. The Mongol Empire didn't just collapse overnight after your passing. It was a gradual decline, a slow unraveling as old alliances faltered and new enemies emerged. By the late 14th century, internal strife and the complexities of governing such a vast realm began to take their toll. The empire splintered into khanates, each ruled by descendants of Genghis Khan, each vying for dominance like a medieval soap opera. Now, let's talk about the great Khan himself. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, is often cast as a ruthless conqueror, a titan of terror. And while it's true that he had a knack for, well, getting things done with a certain brutal efficiency, there's more to the story. His vision wasn't just about conquest, it was about unification. He transformed the steppe from a patchwork of warring tribes into a cohesive force, a feat akin to herding cats with swords. It was his unyielding drive and strategic brilliance that laid the foundation for what would become the largest contiguous empire in history. But history is written by the victors, or in this case, the survivors. The tales of Mongol brutality have been etched into the annals of time, often overshadowing their contributions to the world stage. Take the Pax Mongolica, for instance. Under your rule, peace and stability reigned across the Silk Road, fostering an era of unparalleled trade and cultural exchange. It was a golden age of globalization before the term was trendy, a testament to the power of unity under a single banner, even if that banner was occasionally soaked in blood. Speaking of blood, let's not sugarcoat the Mongol legacy. The conquests were as merciless as they were effective. Resistance was met with annihilation, a grim strategy that ensured compliance through sheer terror. Historians estimate that as many as 40 million lives were claimed by the Mongol expansion, a staggering number that leaves a lasting stain on an otherwise groundbreaking era. Yet, here's the twist. Those very conquests also laid the groundwork for a more connected world. It's the ultimate paradox of empire, a legacy of blood and bridges, destruction and development. But why does this story still captivate us? What is it about the Mongols that keeps us coming back for more, like a blockbuster franchise with endless sequels? Perhaps it's the allure of the underdog narrative, the rise of a boy from the harsh Mongolian steppe to the ruler of an empire. Or maybe it's the sheer audacity of it all, the idea that a small band of nomads could conquer the known world with little more than horses and grit. It's a tale as old as time, the triumph of the unlikely hero, or in this case, anti-hero. Modern interpretations of the Mongol legacy often teeter between admiration and horror, a balancing act that reflects our own complex relationship with power and ambition. On one hand, we marvel at the empire's achievements in trade, communication, and cultural exchange. On the other, we recoil at the brutality, the sheer human cost of expansion. It's a narrative that forces us to confront the duality of human nature, the capacity for creation and destruction, innovation and annihilation. Yet, there's something undeniably compelling about the Mongols, an enduring fascination that transcends time and space. Perhaps it's the way they reshaped the world, leaving an indelible mark on history that continues to echo in our modern age. Their story is a reminder that history isn't just a series of events, but a tapestry of interconnected narratives, a blend of myth and reality that challenges our understanding of the past. And as we wrap up this journey through the rise and fall of the Mongol Empire, let's consider the legacy they left behind. It's a legacy of contradictions, of triumphs and tragedies, of dreams realized and dreams shattered. The Mongols were more than mere conquerors. They were architects of a new world order, a force of nature that reshaped the contours of civilization. Their story is a testament to the power of vision, the resilience of the human spirit, and the complexity of the human condition. So next time you find yourself pondering the vastness of history, remember the Mongols, not just as warriors riding across the steppe, but as visionaries who dared to dream big. They remind us that the past isn't just a collection of dusty old tales, but a living, breathing narrative that continues to shape our world in ways we can only begin to imagine. And as the echoes of their empire fade into the annals of time, their legacy endures, a paradox of power and progress that will captivate generations to come. Mediterranean, around 1600 BCE, was a bustling hub of human ingenuity and drama, and right in the thick of it was the Minoan civilization on Crete. Picture a world where the phrase, "a palace fit for a king," was basically an understatement. Welcome to Knossos, the crown jewel of Minoan architecture. Now, don't let the romanticized image of toga-clad peaceful islanders fool you. This was a society that knew how to build, trade, and presumably throw a good feast. Knossos wasn't just a pile of stones stacked with artistic flair. It was a sprawling complex of over 300 rooms. Think ancient real estate magnates with a penchant for labyrinthine designs. And yes, that's where the whole Minotaur myth possibly got its start. But let's not get distracted by mythical beasts. The real beast here was the Minoans' architectural prowess. This palace had plumbing, actual plumbing, and a drainage system that would make even modern engineers take notes. The Minoans weren't just architectural wizards. They were the Steve Jobs of ancient trade. Their ships sailed across the Aegean Sea like it was their personal highway, and they traded everything from pottery to precious metals. Imagine a world where your ceramic jar was essentially the iPhone of its day. Everyone wanted one. These guys didn't just dabble in trade, they dominated it. They exported their distinctively decorated pottery far and wide, reaching as far as the Cyclades and mainland Greece. Their trade routes stretched like ancient tentacles, bringing wealth and goods right back to Crete. And with trade comes an economy that needed a system, a language, a way to keep tabs on all those amphoras of olive oil and wine. Enter Linear, the Minoan script that's still keeping linguists up at night. We can read it as well as a toddler reads Shakespeare. Lots of enthusiasm, but not much comprehension. What we do know is that these symbols were likely used for record keeping, because when you've got goods moving faster than gossip, you need some way to track your assets. But let's pump the brakes on the notion of the Minoans as the peace-loving hippies of the Bronze Age, the romanticized vision of a society where everyone was too busy painting frescoes and sipping wine to fight is a bit of a stretch. Sure, they might not have been as war-happy as their Mycenaean neighbors, but peace wasn't exactly a permanent fixture either. The Minoans had fortifications, and there's evidence suggesting some form of conflict, or at least the preparation for it. After all, you don't build walls unless you think someone might want to knock them down. So, why does this all matter? Because the Minoans laid the groundwork for an interconnected ancient world. They pioneered trade networks and cultural exchanges that would shape the civilizations to come. Their influence on the Mycenaeans was like that of a savvy mentor to an eager apprentice. The Minoans set the stage with their economic and cultural innovations, and the Mycenaeans, ever the ambitious students, took notes. In this tale of ancient hustle and bustle, the Minoans remind us that innovation and influence aren't just modern concepts. They were trailblazers of their time, leaving behind a legacy of architectural marvels and economic prowess. And as we dig through the ruins of Knossos, we find echoes of a society that was anything but ordinary. They were the movers and shakers of their age, leaving a legacy that would ripple through history like a stone cast into the Aegean Sea. And speaking of influence, let's shift our gaze from the Minoans' architectural feats to their cultural footprint, which was as wide as the Aegean itself. You see, the Minoans were like the artistic influencers of their day, spreading trends across the seas faster than a trending TikTok dance. Their art was all about natural beauty and exquisite detail. Think vibrant frescoes of dolphins dancing and bulls charging. These masterpieces were more than just wall decor. They were a visual symphony that the Mycenaeans couldn't resist. Now, let's talk about the Mycenaeans, who were essentially the Minoans' mainland cousins, with a knack for borrowing more than just a cup of sugar. The Mycenaeans were the kind of neighbors who saw your garden gnome and decided they needed a whole garden statue collection. They looked at Minoan art and religious practices and thought, "We'll take one of each, please." But this wasn't a simple case of copy-pasting. The Mycenaeans added their own flair, transforming Minoan elegance into something that matched their more martial aesthetic. Take Minoan frescoes, for instance. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were alive with movement and color, capturing the energy of a society that was buzzing with life. The Mycenaeans, ever the pragmatists, adapted these vibrant scenes into their own artistic lexicon, though with a bit more bronze and brawn. The Minoan love for nature morphed into Mycenaean depictions of chariots and warriors, reflecting their own cultural values. And let's not forget about religion. The Minoans had a pantheon that was as colorful as their art, with goddesses aplenty and a penchant for bull-leaping rituals that would make even the most daring of thrill-seekers pause. The Mycenaeans looked at this and thought, why leap when you can conquer? They took the Minoan religious tapestry and wove in their own threads, creating a blend of belief systems that was as complex as it was fascinating. The Mycenaean pantheon wasn't just an echo of the Minoan gods, but a new chorus, singing their own tune. But let's not get too caught up in the idea of the Minoans as peaceful artists and the Mycenaeans as the tough guys next door. The reality is far more nuanced, and here's where we start busting some myths. The idea of a Minoan golden age where peace reigns supreme is a romanticized notion that doesn't quite hold up under scrutiny. Sure, they might not have been as openly bellicose as the Mycenaeans, but they weren't exactly handing out olive branches either. Evidence of fortifications and weaponry suggests that the Minoans were prepared to defend their prosperity with more than just a stern look. Economic exchanges between these two civilizations were as vital as the cultural ones. The Minoans, with their vast trade networks, were like the Amazon of the ancient world, delivering goods and ideas in equal measure. The Mycenaeans were savvy enough to latch onto this, adapting Minoan trade practices to bolster their own economic might. They didn't just inherit a trade network, they supercharged it, sending their own goods out to the world like ambitious startup founders. So, what does all this cultural remixing mean for our understanding of these ancient societies? It reveals a world that was interconnected and dynamic, where ideas and practices flowed across the sea lanes as freely as the goods that accompanied them. The Mycenaeans weren't just passive recipients of Minoan culture. They were active participants in a cultural dialogue that shaped their identity and legacy. In this tale of two civilizations, the Minoans and Mycenaeans remind us that history isn't just a series of isolated events. It's a tapestry woven with threads of influence, adaptation, and sometimes outright appropriation. And while the Minoans might have been the artistic trailblazers, the Mycenaeans were the ones who took those trails and forged their own paths. This cultural exchange was not a one-way street, but a vibrant intersection of ideas, where the Minoans and Mycenaeans each left their distinct mark on history. But let's not wrap things up just yet. There's more to this story, more layers to peel back as we continue to explore the legacies of these ancient giants. Stay tuned, because the saga of Minoan and Mycenaean interaction is far from over, and the echoes of their cultural exchanges still resonate today, like the faint but persistent whisper of the Aegean waves. As we sail forward in our saga of ancient Mediterranean power plays, we find ourselves in a landscape where the Mycenaeans are emerging with all the subtlety of a rock concert in a library. Around 1400 BCE, these mainland Greeks were cranking up the volume on their ambitions, and the Minoans, once the undisputed headliners of the Aegean, began to see their curtain call loom on the horizon. The Mycenaeans weren't just content to be understudies forever. They wanted the spotlight, and they were willing to seize it by any means necessary. While the Minoans had pioneered trade and cultural exchange, the Mycenaeans mastered the art of the hostile takeover, both economically and politically. Think of them as the ancient world's equivalent of a corporate raider, but with more bronze swords and fewer board meetings. One of the key factors in this ancient coup was the Mycenaeans' knack for military strategy. These guys knew how to throw down. It's like they took a page out of the Spartan playbook before there was even a Spartan playbook. The Mycenaeans fortified their cities with massive walls, think the Great Wall of China on a budget, and launched military expeditions across the Aegean, turning their sights on Crete and beyond. Their warriors were equipped with bronze armor and boar's tusk helmets that might not have been the height of fashion, but were certainly effective in battle. The Mycenaeans were the original opportunistic strategists. When a series of natural disasters hit Crete around 1450 BCE, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, your usual biblical-level calamities, they saw an opening. The Minoans were reeling, and the Mycenaeans were ready to pounce. They not only occupied key Minoan sites, but also integrated Minoan administrative practices, like Linear B, a script adapted from the Minoan Linear A. This evolution wasn't just a linguistic upgrade. It was the Mycenaeans' way of saying, "We've got this under control now, thank you very much." But let's not romanticize this as some peaceful transition of power. The takeover was less like a mutual handshake and more like a corporate buyout with swords. The Mycenaeans didn't just inherit the Minoan world. They absorbed it, sometimes by force, sometimes by savvy diplomacy, and sometimes by sheer persistence. The end result: the Minoan civilization, once a beacon of culture and trade, faded into a supporting role in the Mycenaean-dominated Aegean theater. Now, let's dive into some numbers, because what's a historical takeover without a few stats to back it up? During their peak, the Mycenaeans managed to extend their influence across the Aegean, with trade routes stretching as far as Egypt and the Levant. They weren't just borrowing Minoan trade routes. They were expanding them, like an ambitious franchise owner turning a single pizza joint into a nationwide chain. And what about the economy, you ask? Well, the Mycenaeans knew how to milk a market. They exported everything from olive oil to textiles, and of course, those distinctive ceramics that were the envy of every ancient Martha Stewart wannabe. This wasn't just trade for trade's sake. It was economic warfare, a way to consolidate power and wealth while keeping their neighbors in check. Socially, the Mycenaeans created a hierarchical society, with a king, or wanax if you want to impress at your next trivia night, sitting at the top, supported by a network of elites and warriors. The palatial centers, such as Mycenae and Pylos, were more than just residences for the elite. They were the beating hearts of their civilization, centers of administration, military planning, and economic management. The Mycenaeans didn't just build palaces, they built command centers, each one a testament to their growing power and influence. But here's where the narrative gets a bit sticky. The myth of a seamless cultural transition from Minoan to Mycenaean is exactly that, a myth. While the romantic image of a harmonious handover might be appealing, the reality was far more complex, and dare I say messy. Cultural integration was less about peaceful blending and more about strategic absorption. The Mycenaeans picked and chose what suited them from the Minoan legacy, like a gourmet shopper at a buffet, leaving aside what they didn't need or want. In doing so, they not only preserved, but also transformed key elements of Minoan culture. Minoan religion, art, and administrative practices were adapted to fit the Mycenaean mold, which was decidedly more martial and hierarchical. The peaceful nature of Minoan society, often exaggerated in popular accounts, gave way to the Mycenaean emphasis on warfare and conquest. This wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a shift in the very fabric of Aegean society. As the Mycenaeans rose, they left an indelible mark on the Mediterranean world. By 1400 BCE, the Minoan dominance was a thing of the past, and the Mycenaeans were the new power players on the block. But let's not get too carried away with their success. The Mycenaeans' rise was as much a product of their environment as of their own ambition. They were fortunate, yes, but also shrewd, capitalizing on the chaos of the era to cement their place in history. So, what lessons can we draw from this ancient drama? For one, power is never static. It's a game of musical chairs, and the Mycenaeans knew how to play it well. They were adept at reading the room, recognizing opportunities, and making bold moves, qualities that resonate even today in our own cutthroat world. But this tale isn't over yet. The Mycenaeans might have been at the top of their game, but history is nothing if not unpredictable. As we look ahead to the next chapter, we'll see how the very strategies that propelled the Mycenaeans to power also sowed the seeds of their eventual decline. Stay tuned, because the story of the Mycenaeans is one of ambition, conquest, and ultimately a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. As the Mycenaeans basked in their newfound Aegean dominance, they weren't just content with their shiny new status. Nope, they had their sights set on the future, specifically economic domination. The Minoans had laid the economic groundwork, like setting up the ultimate trade network starter kit, and the Mycenaeans were ready to take it to the next level. Imagine them as ancient venture capitalists with a penchant for fortifications and a love for linear B, their preferred script for keeping tabs on everything from grain to gossip. Linear B, which the Mycenaeans adapted from the indecipherable Minoan Linear A, was their version of a high-tech ledger. Think of it as the Excel spreadsheet of the Bronze Age, helping them track every amphora of olive oil and head of cattle in their burgeoning empire. This wasn't just an administrative upgrade, it was a game changer. With Linear B, the Mycenaeans could efficiently manage their palatial economies, ensuring that their warriors were well fed and their artisans well supplied. This script was more than just a set of symbols. It was the backbone of a society that was all about order, hierarchy, and, of course, wealth. But let's not sugarcoat it. The economic landscape was a battlefield in its own right. With power came responsibility and resource struggles. The Mycenaean economy was as complex as it was ruthless, driven by competition and a relentless pursuit of dominance. Trade routes weren't just pathways for goods, they were strategic arteries that pumped life into the Mycenaean heartland. Controlling these routes meant controlling wealth, and controlling wealth meant controlling power. The Mycenaeans weren't just expanding Minoan trade routes, they were turbocharging them. While the Minoans had reached out to Egypt and the Levant, the Mycenaeans took it up a notch, pushing their influence even further. Picture a Mycenaean ship laden with pottery, textiles, and olive oil, sailing the Mediterranean like an ancient freighter with a mission. And they weren't just exporting goods, they were importing ideas, skills, and innovations that would solidify their place as the new regional powerhouse. But here's where the plot thickens. The Mycenaean penchant for expansion and control came at a cost. The Aegean was a finite world with finite resources, and everyone wanted a piece of the pie. This wasn't a world of endless growth. It was a cutthroat arena where alliances were as fragile as clay pots and betrayals were as common as sea breezes. Economic competition wasn't just about who could trade the most or build the biggest palace. It was about survival in a world where scarcity could lead to conflict. And conflict, as history loves to remind us, was never far from the surface. Resource struggles were as much a part of Mycenaean life as feasting and frescoes. Wars weren't just fought with swords and spears. They were fought with ledgers and trade agreements. The Mycenaeans understood that to control the economy was to control the future. Their palaces weren't just seats of power. They were hubs of economic activity, each one a testament to the Mycenaean knack for turning a profit even in times of uncertainty. Yet, the Mycenaean rise was not just a tale of triumph. Beneath the surface of their glittering palaces lay the seeds of future troubles. Their economy, while robust, was also fragile, reliant on a delicate balance of trade, tribute, and taxation. The very systems that had propelled them to greatness also made them vulnerable to the inevitable shifts in the geopolitical landscape. As trade routes expanded, so did the risks. Piracy, political instability, and natural disasters loomed large, threatening to topple even the most carefully constructed economic empires. And let's not forget the human element. The Mycenaean world, with its strict hierarchies and palatial elites, was a hotbed of ambition and intrigue. The competition wasn't just external, it was internal as well. Rivalry among elites could be as deadly as any foreign threat, and the pressure to maintain status and wealth was as relentless as the Mycenaean drive for expansion. This was a society that thrived on competition and conflict, but it was a double-edged sword, a source of both strength and vulnerability. So, what does this all mean for the Mycenaeans and their legacy? It's a reminder that even the most powerful empires are built on shaky foundations. The Mycenaeans might have been the new masters of the Aegean, but they were also at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Economic success wasn't just a matter of strategy and skill. It was a gamble, a roll of the dice in a world where the stakes were as high as the Mycenaean walls. The story of Minoan influence on Mycenaean Greece is one of both innovation and inevitability. The Mycenaeans took the Minoan blueprint and ran with it, creating an economic and cultural juggernaut that reshaped the ancient world. But as with any great power, the seeds of decline were sown alongside the seeds of success. The very factors that had propelled the Mycenaeans to greatness, trade, competition, and ambition, would also be the ones to test their resilience and adaptability. In this tale of ancient economic rivalry, we see a world that was as dynamic as it was dangerous. The Mycenaeans were more than just conquerors. They were entrepreneurs, strategists, and survivors. They understood that in the game of power, there are no permanent victories, only temporary triumphs. And as we look ahead to the final chapter of their story, we'll see how their ambitions, like the waves of the Aegean, were ever-changing and unpredictable. The saga of the Mycenaeans is far from over, and the echoes of their legacy continue to resonate through history, reminding us that in the world of ancient power plays, nothing is ever truly settled. As we sail into the final chapter of our ancient Mediterranean saga, let's take a moment to appreciate the long shadow cast by the Minoans over the Mycenaeans and beyond. Imagine this. It's as if the Minoans handed the Mycenaeans a cultural starter pack, complete with blueprints for palatial architecture, a pantheon of deities, and a knack for trade that would make even the savviest Silicon Valley entrepreneur blush. But here's the kicker. The Mycenaeans didn't just copy their Cretan cousins. They remixed and reimagined them in a way that left a lasting imprint on history. First, let's talk architecture. The Minoans may have set the standard with their labyrinthine palaces like Knossos, but the Mycenaeans took those plans and injected a dose of mainland practicality. Their citadels, such as Mycenae and Turin's, featured massive, thick walls that screamed, "Come at me, bro," to any would-be invaders. These fortifications, known as Cyclopean walls, were named after the mythical Cyclopes, rumored to be the only creatures capable of moving such enormous stones. Now, that's a legendary marketing strategy if there ever was one. The Mycenaeans weren't just building for style. They were building to withstand a siege, reflecting a society that knew the value of a good insurance policy against chaos. But the architectural legacy didn't stop at walls. The influence of Minoan design can be seen in the Mycenaean adoption of megarons, the grand rooms that served as royal audience chambers and precursor to the great halls of later Greek architecture. These spaces weren't just about function. They were statements of power and prestige, where leaders could flex their social muscles and showcase their wealth. In a time when your architectural prowess was as important as your military might, these grand halls spoke volumes about Mycenaean ambition. Now, let's shift our gaze to religion, a complex tapestry woven from threads of Minoan spirituality, yet dyed in Mycenaean hues. The Minoans were all about nature and fertility, worshipping goddesses and performing ceremonies that would make any modern festival look like a quaint gathering. The Mycenaeans, ever the cultural magpies, took these deities and rituals and infused them with their own martial spirit. The result, a pantheon that was both familiar and fierce, where the gods were not just revered but feared. Take, for instance, the Minoan goddess of the snakes, a figure associated with fertility and the earth. The Mycenaeans transformed her into a more warlike deity, perhaps laying the groundwork for the later Greek goddess Athena. This wasn't just a case of cultural borrowing. It was a strategic blend of spiritual symbolism, adapting Minoan elements to suit their society's needs. The Mycenaean religion became a dynamic fusion, a testament to their ability to adapt and innovate. This religious syncretism had lasting impacts, echoing through history to influence the classical Greek pantheon we know today. The Mycenaeans may have been the bridge between the Minoan world and the later Greeks, with gods like Zeus and Hera finding their origins in this cross-cultural exchange. It's a reminder that cultural evolution is less about purity and more about the art of adaptation. In a world where change was the only constant, the Mycenaeans thrived by being both students and masters of their inherited legacy. And speaking of inheritance, let's not overlook the economic and cultural legacy left behind. The Mycenaeans, with their penchant for trade, took the Minoan model and expanded it like a business empire going global. They weren't just content with local markets. They reached out across the Aegean and Mediterranean, establishing trade networks that would have made even Marco Polo envious. This wasn't just about economic gain. It was about creating a cultural melting pot, where ideas and innovations flowed as freely as goods. The Mycenaeans' ability to adapt and integrate Minoan practices set a precedent for future civilizations. They showed that cultural exchange is not a zero-sum game, but a dynamic process that can lead to new heights of achievement. Their legacy is a testament to the power of syncretism, proving that the most vibrant cultures are those that embrace diversity and change. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of the pure culture. It's a romanticized notion, akin to believing that unicorns are hiding in your backyard. The reality is that cultures have always been in flux, shaped by interactions, trade, and even conflict. The idea of a monolithic culture is as fictional as the Minotaur itself. The Minoans and Mycenaeans remind us that the tapestry of history is woven from many threads, each contributing to the rich complexity of human civilization. So, what's the takeaway from this ancient tale of influence and innovation? It's a reminder that the past is not a static relic, but a living dialogue. The Minoans and Mycenaeans were not isolated islands, but vibrant participants in a world of exchange and transformation. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the human capacity for adaptation. In a world where borders are often more fluid than fixed, their legacy resonates with us today, challenging us to embrace the diversity that defines our shared human experience. As we wrap up our journey through the ancient Aegean, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Minoans and Mycenaeans. Their legacy is a mosaic of innovation, resilience, and cultural exchange that continues to inspire and challenge us. And as we navigate our own complex world of interactions and influences, let's remember the lessons of these ancient trailblazers. That strength lies not in isolation, but in the rich tapestry of connections that bind us all. The Olmecs weren't the type to scribble their life stories across stone tablets, but that doesn't mean we can't piece together a pretty vivid picture of their world. Let's start with the basics. The Olmec heartland, a patch of prime real estate in what's now southern Mexico. We're talking about a stretch of land that would have made any civilization's mouth water, fertile soil, lush forests, and a coastline that was just begging for some ancient version of a beach resort. This was the stage upon which the Olmecs strutted their stuff from around 1200 to 400 BCE, and boy, did they leave a mark. Now, if you're wondering what made these ancient folks tick, think of them as the original influencers of Mesoamerica. They were the trendsetters, the ones who kicked off a cultural revolution long before hashtags were a thing. They didn't just live in the area, they owned it, setting up shop in cities like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. Each of these cities was a hub of innovation, complete with colossal stone heads that would make even the most seasoned sculptor do a double take. We're talking heads weighing between 6 and 50 tons, folks. That's like hauling around a couple of elephants just for the sake of art. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While the Olmecs were busy carving out their legacy, they were also laying the groundwork for a social hierarchy that would make any corporate ladder look like child's play. Picture a society where your birth decided if you were the one calling the shots or the one doing the heavy lifting. At the top, you had the elites, probably the ancient equivalent of CEOs and Instagram influencers, rolled into one. These were the folks who got to enjoy the finer things in life, like fancy jade jewelry and elaborate ceremonial centers. Meanwhile, the commoners were relegated to the sidelines, working the land and supporting the high life of their social superiors. Speaking of jade, it wasn't just a fashion statement for the Olmecs, it was a status symbol. The ability to own and display jade was like having the latest iPhone in a world of flip phones. The elites flaunted it with abandon, and it became a key player in the Olmec economy. Jade was traded far and wide, making its way into the hands of other Mesoamerican cultures and solidifying the Olmecs' reputation as the trendsetters of their time. The Olmecs didn't just deal in jade, though. They were also savvy traders of other goods, like obsidian and rubber. Yes, that's right, rubber. The Olmecs were the original rubber barons, crafting balls that would bounce their way into the hearts of Mesoamerican games. These games were more than just a way to pass the time. They were a serious business. Think of them as a mix between a gladiatorial contest and a high-stakes sporting event, with the potential for a little human sacrifice thrown in for good measure. Of course, all of this elaborate social structuring and economic maneuvering didn't just happen in a vacuum. The Olmecs were part of a larger Mesoamerican tapestry, interacting with neighboring cultures and sometimes borrowing a page or two from their playbooks. They traded ideas and goods, creating a cultural melting pot that would influence generations to come. This interconnectedness is part of what makes the Olmecs such a fascinating study. They were both players and pawns in a grand game that stretched across centuries. Now, let's not pretend the Olmecs were a monolithic culture of peace and prosperity. There's evidence to suggest they were as human as the rest of us, complete with their fair share of conflicts and power struggles. Archaeological findings hint at the occasional spat over territory or resources, and it's not hard to imagine a few bloody skirmishes breaking out when diplomacy failed. After all, when you've got something as valuable as prime farmland or a stash of precious jade, you're bound to have a few jealous neighbors eyeing your assets. But despite these occasional hiccups, the Olmecs managed to maintain their cultural dominance for several centuries. They left behind not just physical artifacts, but also a legacy of ideas and innovations that would echo through the ages. Take their calendar system, for instance. The Olmecs were among the first to develop a system for keeping track of time, a crucial innovation that would form the backbone of Mesoamerican chronology. Their calendar would later be refined by the Maya, who turned it into the elaborate system we often hear about today. So, in a way, we have the Olmecs to thank for all those doomsday predictions that pop up every few years. It's easy to romanticize the Olmecs as mysterious stone carvers who quietly shaped the course of history, but let's not forget the gritty reality of life in their world. This was a society where survival often depended on your social standing, and where the whims of nature could make or break an entire community. Droughts, floods, and other environmental challenges were part of the everyday landscape, reminding the Olmecs that Mother Nature always had the final say. And yet, in the face of these challenges, the Olmecs thrived. They didn't just adapt, they innovated, creating a culture that would inspire those who came after them. Whether it was through their monumental architecture, their sophisticated art, or their complex social systems, the Olmecs left an indelible mark on the history of Mesoamerica. They were the original influencers, shaping the world around them in ways that continue to resonate today. So, as the Olmecs strutted their cultural stuff across Mesoamerica, they were busy crafting a social hierarchy that would put any modern soap opera to shame. At the pinnacle of this ancient society were the elites. Think of them as the Kardashians of the Olmec world, but with a lot more jade and a smidge less social media presence. These high-flying rulers were the ones making the big decisions, throwing the grandest ceremonies, and generally living their best lives, while the rest of the society played supporting roles. First up, let's talk about the rulers. These weren't your run-of-the-mill monarchs. We're talking about leaders who wielded both political and religious power. Picture someone who's not only the president, but also the spiritual guru. These rulers were often seen as semi-divine, believed to have a direct line to the gods, which gave them the ultimate authority to govern. And govern they did, often overseeing vast territories that required a keen sense of diplomacy and a smattering of military might. The Olmecs knew that a ruler's power wasn't just about how many heads you could sculpt. It was also about keeping those tribute payments rolling in from neighboring regions. Political power was just one side of the coin. The religious influence of priests was equally significant. These were the guys who could make or break a ruler's reputation. If the priests weren't on your side, well, let's just say your jade collection might suddenly become a lot less valuable. Priests were the intermediaries between the gods and the people, conducting intricate ceremonies that were crucial to maintaining cosmic balance. They were the ones who decided when sacrifices were needed, and yes, sometimes those sacrifices were a bit more sentient than you'd like to think about over breakfast. Now, don't get it twisted. Being a priest wasn't all chanting and incense. It came with a fair share of perks. Priests enjoyed a status just a smidge below that of the rulers. They often had access to the best food, the finest clothing, and of course, all the jade their hearts could desire. In a society where religion and politics were as intertwined as a pair of meddling in-laws, priests held sway over the masses and could influence everything from agricultural practices to warfare. While the rulers and priests were the visible faces of power, the backbone of the Olmec economy was held up by traders. These folks were the original jet-setters, moving goods across vast distances without the luxury of frequent flyer miles. They handled everything from jade to cacao, ensuring that the Olmec heartland remained flush with resources. But trading wasn't just about goods, it was about influence. By controlling trade routes, the Olmecs could project power far beyond their territorial boundaries, creating a network of alliances and dependencies that kept them at the top of the Mesoamerican food chain. Imagine being a trader in ancient Olmec society. You were part diplomat, part adventurer, and part economic linchpin. Your job was to ensure that the flow of goods never stopped, and that meant navigating everything from treacherous jungle paths to tricky negotiations with rival cultures. These traders were the unsung heroes of the Olmec world, making sure that the elites had their jade and that the ceremonial centers were stocked with the finest offerings. Now, before you start thinking this was all smooth sailing, let's sprinkle in a little reality check. The Olmec's social structure was as rigid as it was hierarchical, and upward mobility was about as likely as finding a snowstorm in the heart of the tropics. Your birth determined your fate, and unless you were born into the elite class, your chances of climbing the social ladder were slim to none. This divide between the haves and the have-nots wasn't just a social construct. It was a lived reality that shaped every aspect of Olmec life. But let's not get too cynical. The allure of the Olmec elites is undeniable. Their lives were wrapped in ceremonies that would make a royal wedding look like a backyard barbecue. From elaborate feasts to intricate rituals, these were the moments where the Olmecs displayed their cultural prowess. Think of it as an ancient episode of Keeping Up with the Olmecs, where every public appearance was a calculated move to reinforce their status and power. Even the architecture was a statement. The ceremonial centers at places like San Lorenzo and La Venta weren't just about religious practices. They were a testament to the power and sophistication of the ruling class. These sites were meticulously planned, with massive platforms, hidden tombs, and of course, those colossal stone heads that still capture our imagination today. These architectural feats required a level of organization and resource management that speaks volumes about the society that built them. But behind the grandeur and the jade-encrusted glamour, there were tensions simmering below the surface. Archaeological evidence hints at power struggles and conflicts, both internal and external. The Olmecs were no strangers to warfare, and their history is peppered with evidence of skirmishes and territorial disputes. When your neighbors are eyeing your fertile lands and your jade stash, diplomacy sometimes took a backseat to more direct methods of conflict resolution. Yet, despite these challenges, the Olmecs thrived for centuries, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the ages. They were architects of a social structure that was as complex as it was enduring, a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. As we continue to unpack their story, remember that the Olmecs were far from just ancient relics. They were dynamic, influential players in the vast tapestry of Mesoamerican history. Stay tuned, because the Olmec saga is far from over. We'll dive deeper into the lives of the common folk, explore their cultural innovations, and uncover more mysteries that this ancient civilization left buried beneath the sands of time. Until then, remember that history is rarely what it seems, and the past is always more complicated and more fascinating than the myths we weave around it. Now let's shift our focus from the jade-adorned elites to the folks who were, quite literally, the salt of the earth, the commoners. It's time to give a shout-out to the artisans, farmers, and laborers who kept the Olmec world spinning while the upper crust were busy commissioning giant stone heads and debating which ceremonial center had the best acoustics for their rituals. Spoiler alert, there were no signal issues with their smoke signals. First up, the farmers. These guys were the unsung heroes of Olmec society, and they had quite the task on their hands. Imagine cultivating crops in a region where the weather could switch from torrential downpour to a drought faster than you can say climate change. Yet, through a combination of grit and ingenuity, they managed to harness the fertility of the land, growing staples like maize, beans, and squash. These crops formed the backbone of the Olmec diet, and without them, the elites wouldn't have had much to munch on during their extravagant feasts. But farming in the Olmec heartland wasn't just about planting seeds and hoping for the best. These agricultural maestros used sophisticated techniques like slash and burn farming to clear fields and enrich the soil. It's a practice that might make a modern environmentalist break out in a cold sweat. But back then, it was cutting-edge agri-tech. And let's not forget about their irrigation systems. No small feat considering they were built without the help of blueprints or heavy machinery. These systems allowed them to control water flow and reduce the risk of flooding, ensuring a steady supply of that all-important maize. Then there were the artisans. While the elite were busy planning their next jade-heavy ensemble, the artisans were the ones turning raw materials into objects of desire. They worked with everything from clay to stone to wood, producing pottery, sculptures, and tools that were both functional and aesthetically pleasing. Think of them as the original Etsy shop owners, creating handcrafted goods with finesse that would put today's craft fairs to shame. Their work wasn't just about making pretty things, though. It was deeply tied to the Olmec economy, with high-demand items like pottery being traded across Mesoamerica, spreading Olmec influence far and wide. Artisans were also behind the creation of those colossal stone heads that have become synonymous with Olmec culture. Carving these behemoths was no small task. Picture chiseling away at basalt boulders that weighed as much as 25 cars combined. It required not just artistic vision, but also serious technical skill and teamwork. And while these heads were undoubtedly commissioned by the elite, the labor and craftsmanship came from the hands of the common folk, who likely toiled for months or even years to complete a single piece. That brings us to the laborers, the backbone of Olmec society. These were the folks who did the heavy lifting, quite literally. Whether it was constructing those massive ceremonial platforms or hauling stones for monumental architecture, laborers were the ones making sure the grand designs of the elite didn't remain just lines in the sand. It's estimated that moving a single colossal head from its quarry to its final resting place could have required the muscle of hundreds of workers over several weeks. It's enough to make anyone respect the power of teamwork and a good pair of sandals. Now, you might be wondering how the commoners felt about this whole setup. Well, life in the Olmec world wasn't exactly a democratic utopia. Your social status was largely determined by birth, and upward mobility was about as likely as finding a Starbucks in ancient Mesoamerica. But let's not paint too bleak a picture. Despite the rigid hierarchy, Olmec society was a well-oiled machine, and the common folk played a crucial role in keeping it running smoothly. Their contributions were invaluable, and without them, the elite's grand plans would have remained just dreams. And while we're busting myths, let's address the romantic notion that the Olmec commoners were living in a state of noble simplicity. Sure, they didn't have to worry about Wi-Fi outages or the latest TikTok trends, but life was far from idyllic. The threat of natural disasters loomed large, and there were constant pressures to meet the demands of the elite. But amidst these challenges, there was also resilience and ingenuity. The common folk were resourceful, finding ways to make the most of their resources and adapt to the ever-changing conditions of their environment. One of the most striking aspects of Olmec society was the way it managed to maintain a delicate balance between the needs of the elite and the realities faced by the commoners. This balance was achieved through a combination of religious beliefs, cultural traditions, and economic exchanges that kept the wheels of society turning. It's a testament to the complexity of Olmec civilization, where every social class played a part in the grand tapestry of life. So, while the Olmec elite might have grabbed the headlines with their jade jewelry and colossal heads, it was the common folk who were the true foundation of the civilization. They were the ones who fed the population, crafted the goods, and built the structures that defined the Olmec world. It's a reminder that history isn't just about the stories of kings and priests. It's also about the everyday people who made it all possible. And on that note, we'll leave the Olmec commoners to their daily grind as we prepare to dive deeper into the mysteries of this ancient civilization. There's still much more to explore, from the cultural innovations that set the Olmecs apart to the enduring legacy they left behind. So stay tuned, because the Olmec saga is far from over, and there are plenty of fascinating tales yet to be uncovered. So, as we explore the Olmec economy, let's start with the basics. Maize. If the Olmecs had a stock market, maize would be the blue-chip stock everyone was clamoring to invest in. Forget gold. This golden grain was the real treasure. Maize was the cornerstone of Olmec agriculture, and it wasn't just about filling bellies. It was a status symbol, a trade good. and, quite frankly, a lifesaver. The Olmecs' ability to cultivate maize in abundance was one of the reasons they could host grand ceremonies and support a complex society. But how did they manage to grow so much maize? Well, the Olmecs weren't exactly ploughing fields with John Deere tractors. Instead, they relied on some serious elbow grease and clever farming techniques. They practiced slash-and-burn agriculture, a method that sounds like it was dreamed up by an ancient pyromaniac, but was actually quite effective. By clearing land with controlled fires, they enriched the soil with ash, which provided essential nutrients for their crops. And when the soil grew tired, they'd let it rest and shift to a new plant, like a farmer rotation system without the spreadsheets. Let's not overlook the Olmec trade networks, which were as intricate as a cat's cradle and just as fascinating. Imagine an ancient Silk Road, but with a lot more jungle and a lot less silk. The Olmecs traded far and wide, and they had a knack for getting their hands on exotic goods. Jade, for instance, wasn't just lying around in their backyard. They had to trade for it, and they were willing to go the distance, literally. This green gem was sourced from regions hundreds of miles away, making it the ultimate luxury item. It was like the Gucci handbag of the ancient world, minus the logo. Speaking of luxury goods, let's talk obsidian. This volcanic glass was sharper than a critic's tongue and was used for everything from tools to weapons. The Olmecs traded for obsidian from the highlands of what is now Guatemala, and it was a hot commodity. Picture an ancient weapons fair where every stall boasts the latest in cutting-edge, pun-intended technology. Obsidian wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. To the Olmecs, it represented power, and owning a fine obsidian blade was akin to having a sports car parked in your driveway, if sports cars could slice through things with surgical precision. But it wasn't just fancy stones and sharp objects that kept the Olmec economy humming. The Olmecs had a thriving market for everyday goods too. Picture bustling marketplaces where traders haggled over everything from cacao beans to rubber. Yes, rubber. The Olmecs were pioneers in rubber production long before anyone thought to stick it on the soles of shoes or use it for bouncy balls. In fact, they used rubber balls in ritual games, where the stakes were about as high as they get. We're talking about the kind of games where losing might mean losing a little more than just your pride. Now, let's debunk a popular myth. The idea that the Olmec economy was all sunshine and rainbows, with everyone holding hands and singing cumbaya. The truth, it was a cutthroat world where resources were scarce and the stakes were high. The Olmecs faced constant pressure to maintain control over their trade routes and resources. Neighboring cultures weren't exactly sending over fruit baskets. They were more likely to send armies. And when diplomacy failed, let's just say the Olmecs knew how to hold their own in a skirmish. The Olmec economy wasn't just about getting goods from point A to point B. It was about wielding influence. By controlling key trade routes, the Olmecs could exert power over neighboring regions, creating a network of alliances that ensured their dominance. It was like a game of geopolitical chess, and the Olmecs were grandmasters. They understood that economic power was just as important as military might, and they played their cards accordingly. In the grand tapestry of Olmec society, wealth wasn't just measured in jade and obsidian. It was also about food production and resource control. The elites, those jade-wearing Kardashians of the ancient world, depended on a steady supply of food to maintain their lavish lifestyles. And that's where the common folk came in, toiling in the fields and ensuring that the maize kept flowing. It was a delicate balance, and the Olmecs managed it with a kind of quiet efficiency that would make any modern economist nod in approval. So, as we pull back the curtain on the Olmec economy, it's clear that it was a complex and dynamic system. It was an economy that could support grand architecture, elaborate rituals, and a social hierarchy that would make any reality TV show seem tame by comparison. The Olmecs were more than just stone carvers and jade enthusiasts. They were economic innovators who understood the power of trade and agriculture in shaping a civilization. As we wrap up this part of our exploration, remember that the Olmec story is far from over. We've only begun to scratch the surface of what this remarkable civilization achieved. In the chapters ahead, we'll delve even deeper into their cultural innovations and uncover more of the mysteries that this ancient people left behind. So stay tuned, because the Olmec legacy is a narrative rich with intrigue, and there's plenty more to discover in the world they crafted with such skill and vision. And so, as we stand on the precipice of ancient history, gazing back at the Olmecs, it's time to separate the lush vines of myth from the sturdy tree of reality. You see, the Olmecs have often been crowned with the grandiose title of Mother Culture of Mesoamerica. But the truth is, this label might be more akin to calling your grandma the inventor of TikTok. Sure, she might have been there first, but the story is a lot more complicated. Let's start with the Mother Culture myth. This notion paints the Olmecs as the original template from which all subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations took their cues. While it's true that the Olmecs were ahead of the game with their colossal stone heads and complex social structures, they weren't exactly the lone architects of Mesoamerican culture. In fact, they were more like the opening act that set the stage for a multi-band festival. The Maya and the Zapotecs, among others, were busy brewing their own cultural concoctions, sometimes borrowing a page or two from the Olmec playbook, but often improvising their own versions. Now, this isn't to say the Olmecs didn't leave a hefty imprint. Their influence is evident in the spread of certain artistic motifs and religious concepts, like the jaguar deity that prowled its way through Mesoamerican iconography. But to see them as the singular source of all things culturally significant is like crediting the invention of rock and roll solely to Elvis, while ignoring the contributions of Chuck Berry and Little Richard. The Olmecs were a part of a vibrant network of cultures, each contributing their own riffs to the grand symphony of human civilization. Let's talk numbers for a moment. The Olmec civilization thrived from approximately 1,200 to 400 BCE, a solid run, but hardly the millennium-spanning dynasty of, say, the Egyptians. During this time, they made remarkable strides in everything from urban planning to art. But after 400 BCE, the Olmec heartland saw a decline, likely due to a combination of environmental changes and internal strife. By the time the Maya were building their sprawling city-states, the Olmecs had already faded into history's background, leaving behind their stone sentinels as silent witnesses. For all their achievements, the Olmecs weren't exactly Mesoamerica's altruistic benefactors. Their society was hierarchical to the core, and while we romanticize their artistic prowess and architectural feats, it's crucial to remember that these were built on the backs of a labor force that had little say in the matter. The colossal heads, as awe-inspiring as they are, were less about artistic expression and more about power projection. Each one was a statement, literally carved in stone, of the ruler's dominance and the laborer's toil. Now, why do the Olmecs still matter today? For one, they're a potent reminder that history is rarely a simple narrative of progress. The Olmecs show us that civilizations are complex beasts, driven by a mix of innovation, conflict, and collaboration. Their legacy is a mosaic of influences that ripple through time, a reminder that even the mightiest cultures can crumble, leaving behind whispers of their grandeur. In our modern world, where we're often obsessed with who did what first, the Olmecs challenge us to appreciate the interconnectedness of history. They teach us that cultural exchange is not just a modern phenomenon, but a timeless reality. Their story is a prequel to the more well-documented histories of the Maya and the Aztecs, showing us that even in ancient times, ideas were traded as readily as goods. So, as we wrap up our journey through the land of the Olmecs, let's do so with a nod to their enduring enigma. Their stone heads continue to gaze into the past, and perhaps into the future, reminding us that history is not a static tableau, but a dynamic narrative, shaped by the hands of many. The Olmecs may not have been the sole mothers of Mesoamerican culture, but they were pivotal players in its complex symphony, their legacy a testament to the intricate dance of human history. And as we stand on the shoulders of these ancient giants, let's remember that the past is not just a series of dates and names, but a rich tapestry of stories, each thread woven by the hands of those who came before us. If you were wandering through Southeast Asia about 1,000 years ago, you might have stumbled upon the Khmer Empire, a civilization that could teach even the most ambitious modern politicians a thing or two about power grabs. This was no petty kingdom with a handful of villages. This was a sprawling empire that stretched its influence over much of what we now call Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. The Khmer Empire was like the Southeast Asian version of a social media influencer, but instead of followers, they had vassal states. Founded in the 9th century, It all kicked off with Jayavarman Roman II, who decided he wasn't content with just being another ruler in the crowd. This guy declared himself Chakravartin, which roughly translates to universal ruler. Think of him as the original mic drop king. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to be the sun around which everyone else orbited. With a title like Chakravartin, he wasn't just setting up a dynasty, he was setting the stage for an empire that would blaze through the centuries with cities, temples, and reservoirs that even today make our modern urban planners scratch their heads in awe. By the time the calendar flipped to the 12th century, the Khmer Empire was in its golden age. This wasn't just a flash in the pan. For nearly 600 years, the Khmer were the big kids on the block, flexing their muscles and showing off their architectural prowess. You see, back then, power wasn't measured by your Twitter following or your GDP. It was all about how big you could build, and the Khmer built big. Angkor, their capital, wasn't just a city, it was a metropolis. Picture a city that, at its peak, housed around 750,000 people. For context, that's like if you took modern-day Seattle, plopped it in the middle of the Cambodian jungle, and added a few extra temples for good measure. But let's not get swept away by the grandeur without acknowledging the political finesse, or shall we say, the Machiavellian drama that kept this empire ticking. You see, while the Khmer kings loved a good architectural project, they also knew the importance of alliances and power plays. Their political structure was a complex web of kings, vassal lords, and advisors, not unlike a contemporary boardroom where everyone's trying to climb the corporate ladder. Key players like Suryavarman Roman II, who reigned from 1113 to 1150, were not just rulers, they were strategists. Suryavarman Roman II was the brains behind Angkor Wat, a temple complex that wasn't just a vanity project, it was a statement. Angkor Wat was the ancient equivalent of a brand logo, except made of stone and built to last for centuries. Suryavarman Roman II wanted to make sure that no one forgot who was in charge, and what better way to do that than to commission the largest religious monument in the world. Move over, Instagram influencers with your lavish mansions. This emperor's flex was a 162, 6-hectare complex that took roughly 30 years to complete. But why stop at temples? The Khmer knew that a sustainable empire needed more than just places to worship. They built an elaborate system of canals and reservoirs, essentially creating a hydraulic city with a water management system that would make today's civil engineers weep with envy. This wasn't just smart, it was essential. The monsoon season could be as unpredictable as a reality TV plot twist, and the Khmer needed to capture and control water for agriculture. After all, you can't feed a metropolis on good intentions and nice stonework alone. Despite the romantic image of a harmonious, industrious civilization, the Khmer Empire was not without its conflicts. Power struggles were as common as the morning sun. Dynastic disputes and external threats kept everyone on their toes. The throne changed hands like a game of musical chairs, and alliances shifted with the wind. But in a strange way, these challenges only seemed to fortify the empire's resolve to push boundaries, literally and metaphorically. As we sift through the tales of conquests and constructions, it's tempting to paint the Khmer Empire as a utopian marvel. Yet, beneath the glorious facade lay the grittier truths. The construction of their monumental architecture wasn't just a matter of brick and mortar. It was built on the backs of laborers, likely conscripted and toiling under the sweltering sun. The empire's opulence and grandeur were as much a product of human ambition as they were of human perspiration. In the grand tapestry of history, the Khmer Empire stands out as a testament to what humans can achieve when they dream big and work tirelessly. Yet, it's also a reminder of the cost of such dreams. Angkor Wat and its surrounding wonders weren't just the products of divine inspiration. They were the results of strategic vision, political prowess, and yes, a fair bit of blood, sweat, and tears. As we dive deeper into the story of Angkor Wat and the empire that built it, we'll continue to unravel the layers of history, mythology, and reality that make it one of the most fascinating chapters in our shared past. So, where do you even start when tasked with erecting a colossal temple that casually sprawls over 402 acres? Welcome to the world of Angkor Wat, the ancient construction site that would make even the most seasoned project managers clutch their clipboards in despair. Picture this. It's the 12th century, and you're about to embark on building the world's largest religious monument without a single power tool, GPS, or even a decent cup of coffee to get you through the day. The logistics of constructing Angkor Wat are nothing short of mind-boggling. First, let's talk materials. Angkor Wat is primarily made of sandstone, which is not exactly the closest resource to the site. These stones were quarried from the Kulin Hills, a mere 50 kilometers away, because why make things easy? Imagine hauling over 5 million tons of sandstone through dense jungle and treacherous terrain. And they didn't have the luxury of a well-paved highway or a fleet of trucks. Instead, they relied on a vast network of canals and the good old backs of elephants and humans to transport these massive blocks. You think your morning commute is rough? Try moving multi-ton stone blocks using just manpower and pachyderms. The labor force involved was as epic as the project itself. It is estimated that thousands, if not tens of thousands, of workers were involved in this grand endeavor. These weren't just your average construction workers. They were a blend of skilled artisans, stone masons, and let's face it, probably a fair number of conscripted laborers who weren't given much of a choice. In today's terms, you might call it an involuntary internship program. This workforce toiled tirelessly under the relentless Southeast Asian sun, shaping the stone with nothing more than chisels and hammers. It was a process that demanded not just physical strength, but an incredible amount of artistry and precision. Now, let's throw a spotlight on the project management, or the ancient equivalent thereof. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Khmer kings didn't cut corners when it came to overseeing their masterpiece. Suryavarman II, the mastermind behind Angkor Wat, was likely the kind of boss who knew every detail of the project, from the grand design down to the last decorative carving. This was project management at its most extreme, where failure wasn't just a minor career setback, it was a stain on your legacy. But let's not sugarcoat it. The ancient project management techniques had their fair share of hiccups. Imagine a construction blunder where someone forgot to align the central tower with the rising sun on the equinox. Oh, the horror. And while our modern architects fret over building codes and safety regulations, the Khmer were more concerned about divine alignment and astrological significance. Forget OSHA violations. Back then, you didn't want to incur the wrath of Vishnu. The craftsmanship of Angkor Wat is another chapter of this grand tale. The temple is adorned with intricate bas-reliefs and carvings that depict everything from celestial dancers to epic battles. These artworks weren't just slapped on for decoration. They were meticulously planned and executed, each telling a piece of the Khmer story. The precision of the carvings, considering the limited tools and technology, is nothing short of miraculous. It's as if the artisans were whispering through the stone, "Take that, future skeptics." Yet, for all its magnificence, Angkor Wat wasn't just a temple. It functioned as a political statement, a cosmic diagram, and a microcosm of the universe. The architectural layout is a testament to the Khmer's understanding of both engineering and celestial mechanics. The entire complex is aligned to face west, a direction typically associated with Vishnu, the Hindu god to whom the temple is dedicated. This alignment wasn't just for show. It was a bold declaration of Suryavarman II, divine right to rule. As we marvel at this architectural wonder, it's tempting to romanticize the Khmer Empire as a civilization that seamlessly blended art, religion, and technology. But let's not forget the grit behind the grandeur. The construction of Angkor Wat was as much about political power and divine authority as it was about religious devotion. It was a statement of dominance, a stone-carved proclamation that the Khmer were not just players in the Game of Thrones, they were the game itself. The staggering scale of Angkor Wat is a reminder of what can be accomplished with ambition, resources, and a whole lot of manpower. Yet, it also underscores the harsh realities of empire building. For every intricate carving and soaring tower, there were countless hours of labor, sweat, and perhaps even tears. The Khmer may have aimed for the heavens with their temple, but they were also firmly grounded in a world where power was fleeting, and the jungle could reclaim even the grandest of human achievements. As we continue to unravel the story of Angkor Wat, it becomes clear that this isn't just a tale of stone and mortar. It's a narrative woven with ambition, artistry, and the relentless pursuit of legacy. The Khmer didn't just build a temple, they crafted a symbol of their civilization's might and vision, one that still captivates imaginations today. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's plenty more to uncover about this ancient marvel and the extraordinary people behind it. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the history and mysteries of the Khmer Empire and its crowning jewel, Angkor Wat. And so, as we continue to explore the wonders of Angkor Wat, let's dive headfirst into the swirling pool of religious and cultural significance that makes this place not just a marvel of ancient engineering, but also a spiritual and artistic epicenter. You see, Angkor Wat wasn't just a temple in the way we think of temples today. It was a cosmic playground, a divine residence, and a statement piece all rolled into one. Originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, Angkor Wat was the ancient world's version of a multi-level marketing scheme for the divine. It was meant to project the power and piety of Suryavarman II, positioning him as the earthly representative of Vishnu himself. Talk about setting the bar high at your local temple committee meeting. But the sands of time, and occasionally the sands of politics, have a way of reshuffling the deck. Fast forward a few centuries, and Angkor Wat found itself at the heart of a religious rebranding. Buddhism swept through the region like a spiritual pop song that you just couldn't get out of your head. And by the 14th century, Angkor Wat had transitioned into a Buddhist temple. This was less of a dramatic makeover and more of a seamless evolution, reflecting the fluid nature of religious practice in the region. It's a bit like converting a blockbuster multiplex into an art house cinema. Same building, different vibe. Why, you ask, did the Khmer Empire flip the religious script? Well, Buddhism's emphasis on personal enlightenment and its less rigid hierarchical structure likely appealed to the masses as well as the ruling elite. The shift from a Hindu to a Buddhist temple didn't involve razing the complex to the ground and starting anew. Rather, it was more of a spiritual home makeover. Statues of Vishnu were either subtly modified or replaced with those of Buddha. The temple's alignment with the cosmos remained intact, because when you've got celestial street cred, you hold on to it. Now, let's talk about the art that adorns Angkor Wat. If you've ever wondered what's going on in those bas-reliefs, you're not alone. They are like the medieval equivalent of a graphic novel, except instead of panels and speech bubbles, you've got intricately carved stone. These bas-reliefs are a sprawling tapestry of mythology, history, and religious devotion, stretching over 800 meters around the temple's outer gallery. One of the most famous scenes is the churning of the ocean of milk, a Hindu myth that's basically the ancient world's version of a high-stakes sitcom. It features gods and demons working together. Yes, you heard that right, to churn the ocean and extract the elixir of immortality. Think of it as the ultimate divine team-building exercise, complete with cosmic rope-pulling. But these aren't just random stories slapped onto stone for decoration. Each scene serves a purpose, reinforcing the temple's religious significance and the king's divine mandate. The carvings were not just for show. They were a visual sermon, a stone-carved PowerPoint presentation for the masses, albeit one that didn't require a tech support team to operate. Speaking of the masses, who actually got to enjoy all this cultural opulence, was Angkor Wat a playground for the elite, or did the average Joe, or rather, the average Khmer, get a peek inside? The answer is a bit of both. While Angkor Wat was undeniably a place of royal and religious significance, it wasn't locked away behind metaphorical velvet ropes. The temple functioned as a pilgrimage site, drawing worshippers from near and far. In a sense, it was a communal space where spirituality and statecraft intersected, a place where the divine and the mundane rubbed shoulders, albeit within the hierarchies of the time. However, let's not romanticize the inclusivity of the ancient world too much. While pilgrims and worshippers were allowed to wander the temple grounds, the inner sanctum was likely reserved for the elite and the priestly class. Access to certain areas was a reflection of social status, much like today's luxury airport lounges. So, while the average Khmer citizen might have been able to admire the architectural grandeur from the outside, the more sacred spaces were a different story altogether. This brings us to the myths that swirl around Angkor Wat like a fine mist. One of the most persistent legends is that the temple was built in a single night by divine beings. While the allure of such a story is undeniable, who doesn't love a bit of divine DIY? The reality is less glamorous. Angkor Wat was the result of decades of meticulous planning, sheer human effort, and let's face it, a hefty dose of imperial ambition. The idea of instant, divine construction is a comforting fairy tale, but the truth acknowledges the sweat and toil of countless laborers. And then there's the notion that Angkor Wat was a utopia of harmony and prosperity, untouched by the troubles of the world. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of empire, the Khmer were no strangers to conflict and power struggles. The temple, like the empire itself, was a monument to human aspirations and frailties, an embodiment of both the heights of creativity and the depths of political maneuvering. Despite these myths, or perhaps because of them, Angkor Wat continues to captivate our collective imagination. It stands as a testament to the Khmer Empire's ingenuity and ambition, a stone-carved reminder of a civilization that dared to dream big. As we delve deeper into this historical tapestry, remember that the story of Angkor Wat is as much about the people who built it as it is about the gods who inspired it. Stay tuned, because the next chapters promise to unravel even more of the mysteries and marvels of this ancient wonder. So as we dig deeper into the story of Angkor Wat, let's zoom out and take a look at the bustling economic machine that powered the Khmer Empire. You see, it wasn't just divine inspiration and architectural ambition that made Angkor Wat possible, but a thriving economy that rivaled the most efficient enterprises of its time. Think of the Khmer Empire not just as a collection of stone temples, but as an ancient conglomerate with branches in agriculture, trade, and even a bit of social engineering. First off, let's talk agriculture, a buzzword that might not sound as sexy as temple or empire, but trust me, it was the bread and butter of Khmer life, and I mean that quite literally. The empire's agricultural system was so advanced that it could feed a metropolis of 750,000 people at its peak. Rice was the star of the show, and not just any rice. They harvested it in quantities that would make a modern-day food supply chain blush. The Khmer didn't just plant and pray for rain. They mastered the art of hydraulic engineering. They built an intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and rice paddies that transformed the region into a supercharged agrarian powerhouse. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a scene out of a farming simulator game, you're not far off. The Great Barre, for instance, was a massive reservoir that could hold up to 50 million cubic meters of water. That's not just a big puddle, it's a man-made lake. This water management system was the Khmer's not-so-secret weapon, allowing them to control the annual floodwaters and ensure a consistent food supply. Forget the stock market. In the Khmer Empire, it was all about the water stock. But while the idyllic image of endless rice fields and bountiful harvests is charming, let's not sugarcoat the reality. The workers who maintained these systems were the unsung heroes of the empire. Toiling under the sun, knee-deep in water and mud, they were the backbone of the entire operation. Their labor was grueling and relentless, a far cry from the romanticized notion of a pastoral paradise. So next time you enjoy a bowl of rice, spare a thought for the ancient Khmer farmers who kept the empire running while barely getting a taste of its grandeur. Moving on to trade, the Khmer Empire was the ultimate hub, a bustling crossroads that connected the Far East with India and beyond. It was like the ancient Silk Road's Southeast Asian cousin. The empire traded everything from spices and gold to ceramics and textiles, using both overland routes and maritime highways. These trade networks were vital, not just for economic prosperity, but for cultural exchange as well. The Khmer were not just importing goods, they were importing ideas, technologies, and even spiritual philosophies. The markets of Angkor must have been a sight to behold, a vibrant blend of colors, sounds, and smells, where merchants hawked their wares and traded tales of far-off lands. If you've ever been to a bustling market in Southeast Asia, imagine that times 10, and you might come close to picturing the scene. Yet, behind this trading, nirvana was a social hierarchy that ensured not everyone got an equal slice of the economic pie. At the top of the Khmer social ladder were the elites, royalty, high priests, and the like, who lived lives of opulence that could make a modern-day reality TV star envious. These were the folks who could commission a temple like Angkor Wat just to make a point. But let's not pretend they got there by sheer luck. Their power was secured through military might, strategic marriages, and sometimes a bit of good old-fashioned palace intrigue. The middle tier consisted of merchants, artisans, and officials who kept the empire's gears turning. These were the white-collar workers of the ancient world, benefiting from the empire's prosperity, but never quite reaching the heights of the elite. Then there were the farmers and laborers, the everyday Khmer citizens who did the heavy lifting, literally. While the elite dined in their palatial residences, these workers often struggled to make ends meet, their efforts rewarded with little more than a subsistence lifestyle. Now, speaking of opulence, let's address those legends of Khmer extravagance. Tales of lavish banquets, ornate palaces, and treasure vaults overflowing with gold abound, painting a picture of a society dripping in wealth. But while it's tempting to get swept away by these stories, the truth is more nuanced. Yes, the Khmer elite enjoyed luxuries, but the majority of the population lived lives of stark contrast. Their existence was marked by hard labor, limited mobility, and the constant pressure to support the empire's grand ambitions. Sound familiar? It should. The Khmer Empire was not unlike modern societies, where wealth disparity and social stratification are as old as civilization itself. The opulence of the few often came at the expense of the many, a theme that resonates through history and continues to echo in our contemporary world. And let's not forget the role of religion in this societal mix. While the temples stood as symbols of divine favor and political power, they also served as centers of social activity. Religious festivals were not just spiritual affairs. They were opportunities for community bonding, political maneuvering, and even a bit of matchmaking. In a way, these gatherings were the ancient world's answer to networking events, where alliances were forged and rivalries played out under the watchful eyes of the gods. In wrapping up this chapter, let's acknowledge that the Khmer Empire, for all its marvels and mysteries, was a society like any other, filled with ambition, ingenuity, and its fair share of contradictions. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Angkor Wat and the empire that built it, remember that history is not just a series of dates and monuments. It's a story of people, people who dreamed, toiled, and sometimes faltered, all in the quest to leave a mark on the world. So stick around, because the next part promises to peel back even more layers of this fascinating saga. And now, as we shift our gaze to the decline of the Khmer Empire, let's get ready to unravel the tangled mess of climate change, warfare, and economic downturns that led to its downfall. If you thought a 1,000-year-old empire was immune to the whims of nature and the pitfalls of human folly, think again. It's a cautionary tale that echoes eerily into our modern world. First up, let's talk climate change. Yep, even back in the day, the weather had a way of turning the tables. The Khmer Empire had thrived in part because of its ingenious water management systems. But what happens when the monsoon rains that had once been as reliable as sunrise start getting a little too moody? By the 14th century, the climate decided to throw a curveball. Long periods of drought were followed by intense monsoon rains, turning the Khmer's carefully balanced hydraulic engineering into a soggy mess. Think of it as Mother Nature's way of saying, "Nice try, but I'm in charge here." These climate shifts wreaked havoc on agriculture. The once bountiful rice paddies became unreliable, and food production plummeted. Suddenly, the empire's breadbasket was more like a crouton. And when you can't feed the people, well, let's just say history has shown that's a surefire way to start losing fans, and fast. Next, enter warfare, because what's an empire's decline without a little saber-rattling? The Khmer weren't just sitting ducks. They were surrounded by ambitious neighbors who would make even the most conniving reality TV contestants look tame. The Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya, in particular, saw the Khmer's struggles as an opportune moment to make their move. Think of it as a hostile takeover, minus the slick suits and PowerPoint presentations. Instead, it was swords, elephants, and the grim drumbeat of armies marching to battle. The Siamese invasions were a significant blow, sacking the capital and destabilizing the Khmer's already shaky hold on power. It was as if the empire was playing a high-stakes game of Jenga, and Ayutthaya just pulled out a crucial block. The Khmer's political structure, once the envy of the region, began to crumble under the pressure of external threats and internal chaos. And let's not overlook the economy, which was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. As trade routes shifted and regional powers rose and fell, the Khmer found themselves losing their grip on the lucrative commerce that had once flowed through Angkor like a river of gold. The once bustling trade networks dried up, leaving the empire's coffers emptier than a desert oasis. Without the economic muscle to support its sprawling infrastructure and military ambitions, the empire's decline was all but sealed. So, with all these factors swirling together in a perfect storm of decline, what became of Angkor Wat? Well, here's where the story takes a twist. While the empire faltered, Angkor Wat stood resilient, a stone phoenix rising from the ashes of political and economic ruin. The temple complex, originally built as a Hindu monument, continued to serve as a religious site, even as Buddhism took center stage. Its walls, bearing witness to 1,000 years of history, remained a focal point for prayer, pilgrimage, and quiet reflection. Fast forward to the 19th century, and Angkor Wat found itself the subject of Western fascination. French explorer Henry Mauhart, who stumbled upon the complex in 1860, played a pivotal role in bringing Angkor Wat back into the global spotlight. His writings, filled with awe and a touch of hyperbole, painted Angkor Wat as a rival to that of Saruman, and sparked a wave of romanticized interest. Suddenly, Angkor Wat was no longer just a relic of a bygone empire. It was a symbol of human achievement, a testament to the ingenuity and artistry of the Khmer people. This newfound attention set the stage for Angkor Wat's transformation into the cultural icon we know today. In 1992, it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, ensuring its preservation for future generations. Tourists flock from every corner of the globe, eager to walk the grounds where kings once tread, to marvel at the bas-reliefs that tell stories older than time itself. Angkor Wat has become a global ambassador for Cambodian heritage, a stone envoy carrying tales of glory, decline, and rebirth. And so, as we wrap up our tale of the Khmer Empire and Angkor Wat, let's pause to reflect on the enduring narrative of human ambition. Empires rise and fall, leaving behind echoes of their triumphs and failures. Yet their grandest endeavors often outlast the fleeting lifespans of their creators. Angkor Wat stands as a testament to this truth, a masterpiece of stone and spirit, defying the ravages of time. In the end, Angkor Wat isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living reminder of the complexities of power, the fragility of human endeavors, and the enduring quest for legacy. The Khmer Empire may have vanished into the annals of history, but its crowning achievement continues to captivate our imaginations, inviting us to ponder the eternal dance of creation and decay. As we leave the story of Angkor Wat behind, let's carry forward the lessons of its stones, that even in the face of decline, beauty, and wonder endure, whispering of the dreams and determination of those who dared to build them.